Crimson Shadow, the Dragon and the Taimanin. Act I, The World Between Worlds. Chapter 1, The Fall. The sky above Kuoh Academy was perfectly ordinary. On the afternoon everything changed. Issei Hyoudou had grown accustomed to the extraordinary. He had fought fallen angels, devil kings, mythological war gods, and creatures that defied the vocabulary of any language spoken in the modern world. He had died and returned. He had forged bonds that stretched across every faction dividing the supernatural cosmos. He had stood inside dragon fire and come out laughing. But standing in the middle of his school rooftop on a Tuesday, watching a crack of violet light split the air 2 meters in front of him, Issei felt something he had not felt in a long time: genuine confusion. The crack was not a magic circle. It was not a dimensional gap signature that he recognized from his months of training with the Occult Research Club. It was not a summoning array, a curse barrier, or a teleportation anchor. It was something older than any of those things, raw and humming at a frequency that made boosted gear pulse on his left arm without any command from him. The gauntlet glowed a steady, cautionary crimson, the way a fire alarm sounds before smoke has even reached the sensors. Issei Hyoudou, third-year student, reincarnated devil, and wielder of the Longinus class sacred gear known as boosted gear, took exactly one step toward the crack before it swallowed him whole. The sensation was nothing like Riasa's teleportation circles, which carried with them the smell of roses and the familiar warmth of her household's power. It was nothing like the cold, dimensional disorientation of passing through a dimensional gap. This was more like being turned inside out while simultaneously being compressed into a point of light, and then, abruptly, not. He hit the ground hard. Issei rolled on instinct, absorbing the impact across his shoulder and back the way Riasa's training regimen had drilled into him over 2 years of serious combat preparation. He came up in a low crouch, boosted gear already active, scanning the environment with eyes that automatically cataloged threat vectors. The first thing he registered was that he was in a forest. Dense canopy. Night-filtered moonlight cutting through gaps in the leaves in silver columns. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and something sharper underneath, something chemical that he could not immediately identify. The second thing he registered was that 2 blades were crossed at his throat. Do not move. The voice that said it was female. Controlled. Carrying the kind of absolute calm that people develop when they have spent years in situations where panic gets people killed. The blade on the right was a short tanto held in a reverse grip, and even in the dim light Issei could see that the edge was exceptional quality, the line between the metal and the dark almost invisible. The blade on the left was longer, a wakizashi style, and the arm holding it was steady with the steadiness of someone who could hold that position for hours. Issei looked up slowly. There were 2 of them. They had come out of the forest canopy so silently that boosted gear, which had been actively scanning the environment, had not registered their approach until they were already within striking distance. That fact alone told Issei these were not ordinary fighters. The one on his right was compact and precise in everything about her posture. Her hair was a rich, dark brown, tied back practically, and she wore a combat suit that was clearly designed for maximum mobility without sacrificing protection. Her eyes were dark and measuring, and the assessment happening behind them was professional and thorough. She looked like she was cataloging him the same way he was cataloging her. The one on his left was taller, with silver-streaked dark hair that fell past her shoulders even tied back, and an air of authority that was simply present, not performed. Her features were sharp and composed. Her blade arm had not moved a millimeter since the moment Issei had looked up. Identify yourself, the silver-haired one said. Demon or human? Issei blinked. That is a complicated question. Neither blade moved. Right, Issei said carefully. Devil, technically. Reincarnated. But I am not here by choice. Something pulled me through a rift, and I have no idea where I am or how I got here. I am not hostile. Every demon that has ever stood on this ground has said something similar, the brown-haired one said. Her voice was quieter than her companion's, but no less certain. I am not a demon. I am a devil. There is a difference. Issei paused. I know that probably does not help. A long moment passed. The forest around them was completely still, The kind of complete stillness that means every living thing in the vicinity has decided to be very quiet and very small. Somewhere above them, an owl shifted on a branch. The silver-haired woman tilted her head fractionally. Her eyes moved to the crimson gauntlet on his left arm, and something changed in her expression. Not fear. Recognition. That is a sacred gear, she said. Yes. An advanced class. Possibly Longinus. Issei stared at her. You know about sacred gears? We know about many things that most people in this world prefer to pretend do not exist. She held his gaze for another 3 seconds, then lowered her blade by a precise, deliberate 2 centimeters. Not fully. But enough to communicate that murder was no longer the immediate option. I am Shizuru Kosaka. The woman on your right is Rinko Akiyama. We are Taimanin. You are in a part of the world that no ordinary human accidentally stumbles into, and you arrived through a spatial tear that we have been monitoring for 72 hours. Who sent you? Nobody sent me, Issei said. I told you, something pulled me through. I was standing on a rooftop and a rift opened. I stepped toward it, and it grabbed me. Why did you step toward it? Rinko asked. Issei considered the question honestly. Because it was weird and I wanted to understand what it was. I do that. My teacher has told me multiple times that it is a problem. The silence stretched another moment. Then Rinko did something Issei had not expected. She lowered her blade completely, sheathed it in a single smooth motion, and offered him her hand. Can you stand? She asked. Yeah. Issei took her hand and let her pull him upright. She was stronger than she looked, which was saying something because she looked extremely strong. Thanks. Shizuru had not fully sheathed her weapon, but it was at her side now, not at his throat. She was watching the tree line with the same professional attention she had given him, like the forest was a problem that had not been fully solved yet. You said you are a Taimanin, Issei said. I have never heard that term. No, Shizuru said. You would not have. You are not from this world. Issei absorbed that. Right. Different universe. We do not typically use that terminology. But the concept is accurate. Okay. Issei looked around at the forest, at the 2 women who had come out of it like shadows deciding to take a human shape, at the boosted gear on his arm that was still pulsing softly in that alert but not alarmed rhythm. So I am in a different world with no way home currently, and 2 ninja women who almost removed my head from my body. We are not ninja, Rinko said. There was a quiet precision to the correction, not offense, just accuracy. Sorry. 2 Taimanin women who almost removed my head. That is more accurate, Rinko confirmed. And there is something in this forest that you were both watching when I landed in it. Shizuru looked at him with a new quality of attention. Yes. I have very good senses, Issei said. The forest stopped being quiet in a natural way about 30 seconds ago. Something is circling us at roughly 40 meters, moving counterclockwise. Rinko and Shizuru exchanged a look. It was the kind of look that carries an entire conversation in the space of a second, the look of 2 people who have worked together long enough to have developed a shared language that lives entirely in their eyes. How many? Shizuru asked him. At least 4 separate presences. Maybe 6. Moving in coordination. Issei flexed his left hand and felt the familiar deep surge of power in the gauntlet. I do not know what they are. But whatever they are not happy about us standing here talking. Shizuru completed sheathing her blade. In the same motion she drew something from a pouch at her side, a cylindrical case that unfolded into something Issei did not have a name for, part weapon, part focus tool, covered in inscriptions that gave off a faint luminescence. Stay close, she said. And try not to do anything that destroys the forest. I make no promises, Issei said, and let boosted gear begin to scale up. Chapter 2, Taimanin. The creatures came out of the tree line like oil spilling across water. Issei had fought a considerable variety of supernatural entities across his career as a devil. He had fought fallen angels with wings of dark light and sacred swords. He had fought vampires old enough to remember the first cities. He had fought Phoenix, a reborn sun-fire bird that remade itself out of its own ashes every time he knocked it down. He had fought dragons. What came out of the trees around them were demons in the truest sense of the term, something that had never been anything other than what they were. They moved on 4 limbs but could reconfigure to 2, and their bodies had the particular quality of wrongness that comes from something shaped by malice rather than nature. 6 of them. Issei had been right about the number. They were approximately 3 meters each at the shoulder, dark-skinned and reflective in the moonlight, and they were completely silent as they moved. The one leading the formation was larger than the others. Its eyes were gold, and they were intelligent in a way that the others were not. Interesting, it said in a voice that sounded like 3 different people speaking at different speeds. A sacred gear bearer. In this world. And so young. I get that a lot, Issei said. Shizuru had already moved. She covered the ground between herself and the nearest flanking demon in 4 running steps and was in the air by the 5th, the cylindrical weapon now extended to its full configuration, striking at a precise angle that drove the creature back and away from Issei's blind side. The inscription along the weapon blazed blue-white on impact. Rinko was already gone. Issei registered her disappearance with a slight shock before he understood what had happened. She had not simply run toward the nearest demon. She had used the terrain, a low branch, a shadow, something he had not tracked, and she was suddenly behind 2 of the circling creatures simultaneously, her tanto in her left hand and a different blade in her right, and she struck before either of them had completed the motion of turning toward where she had been. They were very, very good. The large golden-eyed demon kept its attention on Issei. You do not belong here, bearer, it said, taking a single step forward. The rift that brought you was not an accident. It was an invitation. My master's invitation. You will come with me now, or I will take what my master wants from your corpse. Your master, Issei said. Who is your master? You will learn that soon enough. I have heard that line before, Issei said. It never ends the way the person saying it expects. He drove his fist into the ground. It was not the most elegant technique in his arsenal, but it was fast and it was massive, and the shockwave that rolled out from the point of impact hit the golden-eyed demon in the chest and threw it backward 20 meters into the trees. Issei was already moving before it landed, closing the distance at a sprint, boosted gear's power running through every muscle in his body. The creature was back on its feet before he reached it. Faster than he had estimated. Sacred gear power amplification, it said, reconfiguring itself to its 2-legged stance. You are still in the early stages. Interesting. I am a lot further along than you might think, Issei said, and hit it again. The fight lasted 7 minutes. That was not a long fight by the standards of the battles Issei had been in, but it was intensive, and it covered a significant portion of the forest clearing, and by the end of it 3 of the 6 demons were gone and the other 3, including the golden-eyed leader, had retreated back into the darkness between the trees with a speed that suggested the decision to retreat had been made well before they acted on it. Issei stood in the center of the clearing, breathing hard, boosted gear still active and radiating heat. There was a long scorch mark in the earth where he had driven the golden-eyed demon into the ground on the 4th exchange, and several of the surrounding trees had been knocked at odd angles from the force of the impacts. Shizuru was examining a cut on her forearm with the clinical detachment of someone filling out paperwork. Rinko was completely uninjured. You fight differently from what I expected, Rinko said. She was watching him with that same measuring quality she had had when her blade was at his throat, but the context was different now. Less adversarial. More genuinely curious. Differently how? You are powerful, she said. But you fight like someone who learned to fight in actual battles rather than someone who trained from childhood in a discipline. There is flexibility in it. Improvisation. That is, Issei said, deciding it was a compliment, accurate. Shizuru had finished assessing her arm. The cut was not deep. She folded a piece of cloth over it with the ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times and looked at Issei with that clear, evaluating gaze. Those were scouts, she said. Not a combat unit. Their purpose was reconnaissance and retrieval. The one that spoke wanted to take you somewhere. That is what it sounded like. And it knew what your sacred gear was, she continued. Which means whoever sent it had advanced intelligence. Which means the rift that brought you here was not random. Yeah, Issei said. I had already started putting that together. A silence settled over the 3 of them, not uncomfortable exactly, but full of things that had not been said yet. The forest around them had returned to its owl and wind quiet. The moonlight was generous enough that Issei could see both women clearly, their postures, the weapons they had not yet resheathed, the small details that told him these two people had been in the business of fighting things in dark forests for a long time. "Come with us," Shizuru said. It was not a question, but it was also not the same kind of command as "do not move." It was an offer, simply stated. "Where?" "Our base camp is 2 kilometers northeast. You cannot stay in this forest alone. There will be more of them before dawn." She looked at him steadily. "And you cannot return to your world through a method that does not currently exist. We have researchers. We have contacts. If there is a way to find the source of that rift, we can help you find it." Issei looked at the forest, at the dark spaces between the trees where the demons had retreated. He looked at the scorch marks in the ground and thought about what the golden-eyed demon had said about its master, and about invitations. "All right," he said. "Lead the way." Chapter 3: What a Taimanin is. The base camp was not what Issei had imagined when Shizuru had said the words. He had constructed, from the word camp, something temporary, canvas and portable equipment, and the kind of thin infrastructure that you can fold and carry. What they arrived at after a 20-minute walk through terrain that Rinko navigated with the same effortlessness with which Issei navigated a school hallway was a facility. Underground, accessed through what appeared to be the hollow base of an enormous tree, and built with the kind of permanence that said this had been here for years. The interior was lit with a cool, blue-tinted light that came from panels in the ceiling rather than anything fire-based. The walls were reinforced stone and what appeared to be a composite metal alloy, covered in those same inscription-style markings Issei had seen on Shizuru's weapon. Communication equipment, tactical displays showing topographic maps and what appeared to be energy signature tracking systems, storage racks, a medical station. There was a third person waiting for them inside. She was sitting cross-legged on a low bench with a tablet in her lap, and she looked up when they entered with the unhurried attention of someone who had been expecting them. Her hair was dark blue, worn loose to her collarbone, and she had the kind of face that was simultaneously warm and precisely attentive, the face of someone who was always processing more information than they appeared to be. "You found something unusual," she said, looking at Issei. Not unkindly. With interest. "He found us," Rinko corrected, settling onto a chair with that same controlled economy of motion that seemed to characterize everything she did. "The rift deposited him directly into the South Quadrant monitoring zone." "Convenient," the blue-haired woman said. "Not for him," Shizuru said dryly, moving to the medical station. "He almost lost his head." "I have had worse greetings," Issei said. The blue-haired woman's attention stayed on him with that thoughtful, processing quality. "I am Mizuki Shiranui. I handle research and intelligence for our unit." She glanced at his arm. "That is a Longinus. Boosted gear. Sacred gear of the Red Dragon Emperor." Something in Mizuki's expression shifted in a way that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it. "You are the current Red Dragon Emperor?" "That would be me." She set the tablet down. That, Issei sensed, was significant. Mizuki Shiranui did not put things down to devote her full attention to a topic unless the topic had earned it. "This changes the scope of what we are looking at significantly. Can you explain to me what you are looking at?" Issei asked. He settled onto a bench near the entrance, partly because his legs were informing him that the adrenaline from the fight was finished and he should sit down, and partly because sitting communicated that he was not in a hurry to be anywhere other than here. "All of it. What Taimanin are, what this place is, what those demons were, who their master is." The three women exchanged that shared language look again. Then Shizuru, who had finished bandaging her arm and was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, spoke. "Taimanin are warriors trained specifically to combat supernatural threats," she said. "Demons, cursed entities, organizations that operate in the space between what ordinary people understand and what actually exists. We are not a government agency, though some governments are aware of us. We operate independently, like a shadow organization, like a responsibility," Rinko said. There was something in the way she said it that was not aggressive but was definite, a small correction of framing that mattered to her. Someone has to stand between the things in the dark and everyone who cannot see the things in the dark. Issei nodded slowly. I understand that. He thought of Rias, of the Occult Research Club, of every ordinary day at Kuoh Academy that existed precisely because people with power were doing the work of keeping the ordinary days possible. I understand it well. Mizuki picked up her tablet again, pulling up something on the display. The organization behind those scouts is called the Syndicate. They have been operating in this region for approximately 2 years, and they have been growing. Their leadership is not fully identified, but there is a figure at the center that our intelligence refers to as the architect. We know very little about the architect beyond the operational patterns. Extreme patience. Long planning horizons. A specific interest in acquiring exceptional supernatural abilities. And a sacred gear in this world would be exceptional, Issei said. A Longinus in this world would be unprecedented, Mizuki said. Sacred gears are not native to this universe. There is no record of one appearing here before tonight, which means the architect somehow arranged for one to be pulled here. That is our working hypothesis. Issei sat with that for a moment. The idea that someone had identified him, in a different universe, and engineered a scenario to pull him across dimensional barriers was either flattering or deeply alarming, and on reflection it was primarily deeply alarming. I have a few questions about the rift, he said. I have a few answers, Mizuki said. Some of them might even match the questions. Issei almost smiled. The rift. What created it? How was it opened and can it be reopened in the other direction? We detected the energy signature 72 hours before you appeared, Mizuki said. It was building over time, which suggests either a very powerful sustained effort or the use of an artifact capable of that kind of sustained output. We do not know which. As for reopening it in the reverse direction. She paused. That is a harder question. The rift closed completely within 3 minutes of your arrival. We recorded everything we could in that window. It is possible to reconstruct a compatible signature, but it would require a power source on par with whatever created the original. So I need to find the architect, or something of equivalent capability, and the architect is actively sending retrieval squads after me. It appears so. Issei leaned back and looked at the ceiling. The cool blue light of the base was steady and practical, nothing like the warm glow of Rias's household, nothing like the red-orange shimmer of his sacred gear at full output. Different world. Different rules. Different people standing in the dark with their backs to the light. All right, he said. Tell me everything you know about the Syndicate. They talked for 3 hours. Issei had always been a better listener than people expected, given that he presented as someone who operated primarily on instinct and enthusiasm. What people often missed was that the instinct was trained, and the enthusiasm was a genuine desire to understand, and underneath both of those things was a willingness to sit with information until it made sense that was, in its own way, a kind of discipline. Mizuki was the primary speaker, systematic and thorough, presenting the intelligence picture with the precision of someone who had spent years constructing it. Shizuru supplemented with field context, the weight of direct experience filling in the spaces between Mizuki's data points. Rinko spoke less frequently, but when she spoke it was always to offer the detail that reframed something, the thing that you did not know you needed to know until she said it. The Syndicate was old. Older than the 3 women had initially estimated, Mizuki said. Recent intelligence suggested roots going back 4 decades, minimum. They had operated in the shadows for most of that time, building infrastructure, recruiting, acquiring resources with a patience that was almost geological. The architect had accelerated their timeline in the past 18 months. New operations. New targets. A specific focus on breaching what Mizuki called barrier points, locations where the structural integrity of this universe's dimensional boundaries was thinner than elsewhere. The location where you arrived, Shizuru said, is one of the primary barrier points in this region. We have been monitoring it because we expected a Syndicate move. We did not expect the move to involve pulling someone through from outside. Is there anything in their intelligence gathering that suggests they were specifically looking for a sacred gear? Issei asked. Mizuki was quiet for a moment. There is a fragment of intercepted communication from 4 months ago. The phrasing referred to a weapon that grows without limit. She looked at him. That is how your gear works, is it not? Amplification? Doubling, he said. Base power doubling at intervals, with the ceiling effectively being the limit of what the wielder can survive. A weapon that grows without limit, Mizuki repeated quietly. In the right hands, Issei said, or the wrong ones? The room was quiet. Outside, somewhere in the forest above them, the wind moved through the trees. Then we understand each other, Shizuru said. She pushed off the wall and looked at him with that silver gaze steadiness that Issei was beginning to understand was simply how she existed in the world, present and clear and without softening at the edges. You need to find the architect to find a way home. We need to stop the syndicate before they destabilize the barrier points entirely, and create something neither of us wants to think about. Our objectives overlap. They do, Issei agreed. Then stay, she said. Work with us. We are better equipped to find the architect than we were an hour ago, and you are better positioned to survive what comes next if you are not doing it alone. Issei thought about Rias. He thought about Akino and Kaneko and Zenobia and Asia and everyone in Kuoh who would be noticing his absence. He thought about the fact that every moment he spent in this world was a moment he was not in his. He also thought about the golden-eyed demon and its matter-of-fact discussion of masters and invitations, and about the architect who had waited 4 months of patient intelligence work to reach across universes and drag a sacred gear-bearer into a world where that power had no precedent. Yeah, he said. I am in. Chapter 4, The Dragon in Their World. He slept on a cot in the equipment room, which was quieter than the main operations area and significantly warmer, and when he woke up the base was already running at full capacity. The first thing Issei did was check boosted gear. It responded normally, the familiar warm pulse of Draig's presence deep within the gem, slower now, the way a heartbeat settles during rest. The dragon was quiet. He had not yet spoken since the rift passage, and Issei was mildly concerned about what the dimensional crossing had done to their connection. Still here, came a deep voice inside his mind, at precisely the moment he began formulating the worry. Draig, Issei said under his breath. This world is strange, the ancient dragon said. I can feel the difference. The underlying structure is not what I am calibrated to. My power output may be slightly lower than usual until I adjust to the local dimensional resonance. How slightly? Nothing that will matter in a standard engagement. 15, perhaps 20% reduction in base output. It will normalize within a day or two. A pause. Those Taimanin. The ones who found you. They are exceptional, boy. I know. The silver-haired one in particular. I have been alive for a very long time and I have seen warriors across more worlds than I care to count, and that level of composure under dimensional rift conditions, encountering something genuinely unprecedented, is rare. You are telling me this why? I am telling you this because you are in an unfamiliar world with no allies and no support structure, and the people who have offered to work with you are worth working with. Do not be an idiot. I already said yes, Issei said. You said yes, Draig confirmed. I am advising you to mean it. Rinko was in the operations area when Issei emerged, standing at one of the tactical displays with a cup of something hot that she was holding in both hands the way people hold things they are using for warmth rather than consumption. She looked up when he came in. There is food, she said. Left side of the storage rack. It is not remarkable, but it is food. That is my primary criterion, Issei said, and found the shelf she was indicating. He ate standing, watching the tactical display over her shoulder. It showed the forest they had been in the night before, the barrier point marked in blue, and a series of red data points indicating where the scouting squad had approached from and retreated to. The retreat pattern, he said, after a moment. They all converged on the same vector going out. Northeast of where we fought. Rinko turned to look at the display, then back at him. There was a slight quality of reassessment in the look. Yes. Mizuki ran that analysis early this morning. We think there is a staging point in that direction. Possibly a permanent installation. A staging point that close to a barrier location means they are not done with whatever they were setting up here. No, Rinko agreed. They are not. She returned her attention to the display, but the quality of her attention had shifted slightly, become slightly less internal, slightly more shared. Issei had been around people who communicated through observation and silence long enough to understand when the shift happened. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask. Last night you lowered your blade before Shizuru did. Before she made any kind of decision about whether I was a threat or not." "Why?" Rinko was quiet for a moment. "You fought the scouts the way someone fights things they want to stop, not things they want to destroy. There is a difference in the form. You kept driving them back rather than eliminating them. You took a hit in the third exchange that you could have avoided if your primary objective had been clean elimination rather than keeping them away from Shizuru's blind side." Issei blinked. "You saw all of that in the middle of fighting two of them yourself." "I see most things," she said, without pride, just statement. "And what someone's fight form tells you about them matters. It tells me more than what they say about themselves." Issei thought about that. He thought about the things Rias had told him in his early months, about how the way someone fights reveals the architecture of what they care about. He had learned that lesson in exchange after brutal exchange, in the moments where he had chosen to stand in front of someone rather than move faster than the impact. "Fair enough," he said. Rinko's gaze was on the tactical display again. "You cared about our safety before you knew anything about us," she said. Quiet. Precise. "That is also useful information." Shizuru arrived an hour later with Mizuki, and with them a fourth person, a young man named Tatsuru who was apparently their communications specialist, and who looked at Issei with the wide-eyed recognition of someone who had read every piece of intelligence documentation Mizuki had on sacred gears and was currently experiencing the cognitive dissonance of watching one walk around the operations room eating reconstituted rice. "He is not a threat," Shizuru told him, with the kind of patience that someone exercises when they have said something very similar many times before. I know, Tatsuru said. He looked at Issei again. "Can I ask about the doubling mechanic?" "Later," Mizuki said, and spread a series of physical maps across the central table. The maps were detailed in a way that spoke to years of accumulated field intelligence, dense with annotations in multiple handwriting styles, overlapping revisions, small symbols that Issei could not read but that clearly carried significant meaning to the four people around the table. Mizuki pointed to a location northeast of the barrier point. "Here," she said. "Based on the retreat vector and 3 separate energy signature anomalies we have recorded over the past month, we believe this is the Syndicate's primary regional installation. It is built into the base of an old mountain infrastructure complex, partially underground. We have not been able to get close enough for direct reconnaissance because the outer perimeter is heavily surveilled." "Until now," Shizuru said. "Until now," Mizuki agreed. She looked at Issei. "Your sacred gear energy signature is distinct from anything native to this world. When the scouting squad retreated last night, they were carrying that signature back with them. The Syndicate's tracking systems are calibrated for local supernatural energy profiles. They cannot currently distinguish your power output from background noise because they have no reference frame for it." "You want me to get close to the installation," Issei said. "We want you to get close to it while we approach from the southeast and create a controlled diversion," Shizuru said. "Not a full assault. A probe. We need intelligence on what is inside before we commit to anything larger." "And if the architect is in there?" Shizuru's gaze was even. "Then we improvise." Issei looked at the map, at the terrain between their current position and the marked installation, at the distance, and the elevation changes and the 3 separate points where Mizuki had marked possible additional scouting positions. He thought about the golden-eyed demon's certainty, the way it had spoken about its master's invitation, and what that certainty implied about how much the architect believed the situation was under control. "How long until we move?" he asked. 2 hours, Shizuru said. "Use the time." Issei nodded. He looked at the map for another moment, memorizing it. Then he went to find Rinko, because there were things about the way she moved through terrain that he wanted to understand before he had to move through difficult terrain alongside her, and because in Issei's experience, the best preparation for a complex operation was understanding the people you were going to do it with. Chapter 5, The Red and the Shadow. They found a space near the equipment room where the ceiling was high enough that Issei could demonstrate boosted gear output without the risk of scorching anything critical, and Rinko watched him work through a standard power scaling sequence with the same attentive stillness she seemed to bring to everything. The doubling happens at fixed intervals? She asked. Based on aura density accumulation. The intervals vary with the amount of power being channeled and the intensity of the situation. In a low-intensity state I can hold a doubled level for several minutes. In high-intensity combat the intervals compress, and the ceiling is personal capacity. My capacity has gone up considerably over the past 2 years, he said. Training and genuine combat. Each time I have been pushed past what I thought my limit was, the limit moved. Rinko considered this. What is your current practical ceiling? If you had to estimate, in this world, with the adjustment Drake mentioned? Issei thought about it. High-level devil range. Comparable to a mid-tier devil king. He paused. On a good day. And the scouts we encountered last night? Below that. Considerably. The entities guarding the installation will not be scout class, Rinko said. No, Issei agreed. Probably not. Then tell me the weak points. Every power system has them. He looked at her. You are very practical. I am alive, she said. They are related. He showed her. The charging transition moments, when the doubling cycle reset and there was a half-second gap before the next level locked in. The directional bias toward the left arm, where the gauntlet was, which created a fractional response time delay on right-side attacks if he had been holding a channeled level for longer than a minute. The specific cost of the gift transfer function, which allowed him to lend power to others but which significantly reduced his personal output capacity for the duration. Rinko listened to all of it without note-taking, storing it in whatever meticulous interior filing system she maintained. Then she said, and when we are moving through the perimeter approach tonight, you will be in a suppressed output state. Drake says he can modulate the signature to something closer to ambient. It is not perfect concealment, but in the context of their tracking calibration being off for foreign energy signatures, it should be enough. Should be, she repeated, is the standard operating assumption where I come from, he said. A very small thing happened at the corner of Rinko's mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was the movement that precedes the decision to smile, stopped just before completion. Where do you come from, she said. Not the universe. The specifics. A town called Kuoh. In Japan. A very ordinary town, on the surface. On the surface. It has a high concentration of supernatural activity underneath the ordinary surface. Devils use it as a territory. I am part of one of those households, technically. A reincarnated devil. He paused. It sounds strange when I say it in order like that. My world has its own version of strange, Rinko said. I grew up in a Taimanin training environment. My earliest memories involve obstacle courses designed by people who believed that children were most efficiently shaped by genuine difficulty. That sounds hard. It was. It was also, she said, choosing the word carefully, clarifying. You learn what you are made of when everything around you requires you to be the best version of yourself to get through the day. Issei thought about his own path, about the boy he had been before Rias had found him dying in a park, about the person he was becoming through the accumulated weight of every fight, and every loss and every moment when someone he cared about needed him to be better than he was. Not the same path as Rinko's. But something in the direction, the clarifying function of genuine difficulty, was familiar. You know, he said, for someone who almost took my head off 8 hours ago, you are surprisingly easy to talk to. Now the thing at the corner of her mouth did complete itself, briefly, into something that was unmistakably a smile even if it was small. You are surprisingly straightforward for someone who arrived through a dimensional rift into a monster ambush. I have had a complicated few years, Issei said. The bar for what registers as unusual has moved considerably. Before she could respond, Shizuru's voice came from the operations room. Issei. Rinko. We move in 90 minutes. Come and review the approach route. Rinko stood in the single fluid motion that Issei was starting to expect from her, and moved toward the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back. For the record, she said. The head removal was a precaution, not a preference. I will keep that in mind, Issei said. She was gone before he finished the sentence, moving through the base with that particular quality of motion that he was only now beginning to understand was not just physical training but something more fundamental, a way of existing in space that the Taimanin either developed or were selected for, a relationship with the physical world that was closer and more deliberate than almost anyone Issei had ever encountered. He followed her, and tried not to feel, already, like this world had always had a place in it that was shaped exactly like the space between these three women. Chapter 6: Approach. The forest at night was a different organism from the forest during the day. Issei had done enough nighttime operations in his time with the Occult Research Club to know the basic mechanics of moving in low light, how to use peripheral vision for contrast detection, how to manage footfall noise on different terrain types, how to calibrate distance estimation when depth cues were reduced. He was not, by training, a stealth specialist, but he was a fast learner, and he had learned from people who were excellent. Moving through the forest with Shizuru and Rinko was a lesson in the distance between competent and exceptional. They did not simply move quietly. They moved as if they were made of the same material as the forest, as if the shadows between the trees recognized them and made adjustments. Rinko chose paths through the undergrowth that left no sign of passage, not because she was avoiding each individual obstacle but because she had already internalized the pattern of the terrain, and her route accounted for it as a whole. Shizuru moved 5 meters to their left, and Issei could only confirm her location because he was specifically tracking her energy signature with boosted gear, not because he could see or hear her. He did his best. Rinko glanced back at him once, early in the approach, and the glance said he was doing well enough, which he decided to take as high praise given the source. They had split from Mizuki and Tatsuru 40 minutes back. Those two were coming in from the southeast, carrying the equipment for the diversion, 3-directional aura emitters calibrated to produce a signature consistent with Taimanin chi techniques. The plan was simple in architecture and demanding in execution. The diversion would draw surveillance attention to the southeast while Issei, Shizuru, and Rinko reached the outer perimeter wall of the installation from the north. What we need, Shizuru had said during the briefing, is confirmation of the installation's interior layout. Entry and exit points, approximate personnel numbers, and if possible, the location of any active artifact use, since artifact use is likely to be connected to the barrier point manipulation that opened the rift. We are not going in, Issei had asked. Not tonight. Tonight we look. We learn. We leave. He had nodded, accepting the logic even as the part of him that had been shaped by 2 years of dive-in and figure-it-out combat operations filed a quiet objection. Now, moving through the dark with the installation's energy signature becoming gradually more perceptible through boosted gear's ambient sensing, he understood what Shizuru had meant when she described the syndicate as patient. The perimeter was extensive. The outer surveillance layer was set at intervals designed for overlapping coverage with no gap large enough for a standard approach. Whoever had designed it had thought carefully about the range of threats they were guarding against. There, Rinko murmured, so low that the word barely disturbed the air. Issei followed her sightline. 20 meters ahead, the trees thinned, and beyond them he could see the outer wall of the installation, built into the rock face as Mizuki had described. The wall was 8 meters high, smooth, covered in the same inscription-style markings as the Taimanin equipment, but arranged in a pattern that felt actively hostile rather than functional. Defensive array, Shizuru said, appearing at his right shoulder so silently that he managed, barely, not to react. It will respond to direct chi or sacred gear energy contact. We stay below the threshold. How far below? Think less, not more, she said. That is a very specific instruction. It is the accurate one. Issei dialed boosted gear down to the lowest possible active state, the level where it functioned more as a sensor than a weapon, the faintest possible hum of Drake's presence underneath normal sensory awareness. The gauntlet's glow faded to almost nothing. They moved forward. The diversion triggered at the precise planned moment. Even at this distance, Issei could perceive the bloom of the aura emitters to the southeast, 3 distinct chi signatures flaring into activity, moving in a pattern designed to suggest an advancing Taimanin unit. The surveillance response was immediate, attention pulling in that direction with a thoroughness that said the installation's operators took Taimanin incursions seriously. They had perhaps 4 minutes. Rinko was already at the base of the outer wall, running her fingers along the surface in a systematic pattern, reading the defensive array the way Issei might read a new opponent's fighting style. Shizuru was covering their rear approach, tracking the perimeter surveillance positions with eyes that could apparently function effectively in almost no light. There is a secondary entrance, Rinko said. 40 meters east along the wall. Lower inscription density, which suggests lower priority and less frequent use. Service access, Shizuru said. Can you read the array pattern from here? Partially. It is older than the main installation markings. Possibly predates the Syndicate's occupation, meaning they did not design it and may not have fully integrated it into the main defensive system, Shizuru said. That is the possibility. Issei had been scanning with boosted gear in its reduced state, trying to read what was beyond the wall without triggering the array. The power signatures inside were more complex than he had expected. Multiple entities, none of them scout class. At least 2 that registered in a genuinely elevated range. And underneath all of it, something else, a slow, deep pulse that was familiar in a way that made him uneasy. Shizuru, he said quietly. I see it too, she said, before he could explain what he had found. What is that? The deep pulse? Barrier manipulation, she said. Active. They are currently running a process against one of the local barrier points. Opening another rift? Not yet. Destabilizing. Building toward a threshold. She looked at him. At the current progression rate, we estimate 72 hours before a major barrier failure in this region. A major barrier failure meaning large-scale incursion capability. The kind that does not require careful rift engineering. The kind that opens a door wide enough for an army. Issei absorbed this. So the timeline just changed. Significantly. 3 of their 4 minutes were gone. We have what we came for, Rinko said, already moving back toward the tree line with that seamless integration with the terrain that she carried as naturally as other people carried their names. Shizuru looked at Issei for one more second. Something in her expression acknowledged what both of them had just understood, that the careful, patient timeline they had been planning against had compressed without warning, and the next 72 hours were going to require decisions that went beyond reconnaissance. Then she moved, and Issei moved with her, back into the dark forest with the weight of the installation's pulse at their backs and the knowledge that everything was now moving faster than anyone had planned for. Chapter 7, 72 Hours. The briefing when they returned had none of the structured calm of the one before the operation. Mizuki and Tatsuru had made it back safely, the diversion having functioned as designed, and Tatsuru was running the recorded energy signature data through their analysis systems while Mizuki listened to Shizuru's field report with the focused attention of someone rapidly reorganizing a significant mental model. 72 hours to major barrier failure, Mizuki said when Shizuru finished. That is based on the progression rate you observed, which could accelerate if they increase the active process output, Shizuru said, or decelerate if something interrupts it, Issei said. Everyone looked at him. The process I felt through the wall was drawing power from somewhere. It was not operating in isolation. If you cut the power supply to a sustained process, the process degrades. He looked at Mizuki. In the intelligence you have on the Syndicate's regional operations, is there anything about how they manage power generation for large-scale artifact use? Mizuki moved to her tablet. There are 3 anomalous energy signatures we have catalogued in the broader region that we attributed to Syndicate activity. We had not identified them as power nodes specifically. If they are drawing on distributed nodes to sustain the barrier manipulation, Issei said, disrupting even one of them would buy time. Possibly force them to consolidate, which might tell us something about which nodes are most critical. Another moment of that shared language exchange between the 3 women. Mizuki was already pulling up maps. Shizuru was looking at the network of marked anomalies with the sharp attention of someone seeing a pattern she had missed before. Rinko was looking at Issei. You identified the power draw through the wall in a suppressed output state with a sacred gear that is operating below normal capacity due to dimensional adjustment, she said. Drake has a good nose for this kind of thing, Issei said. Drake, Mizuki said. The dragon? The consciousness within the sacred gear. The original Red Dragon Emperor. Can he provide more detailed analysis of the barrier manipulation process? Issei checked internally. Drake responded immediately, and the response was characteristic, precise, slightly irritated at being asked to perform analysis rather than combat functions, and thoroughly informative. He says the process they are running is not native to this world's supernatural mechanics. It is imported. Something was brought in from outside to perform this function. Issei paused, listening. He says the signature is consistent with artifacts from a specific category of dimension engineering tools, and that the only entities in his experience with access to that category are those with experience crossing dimensional barriers. Which means the architect has done this before. The room was quiet. Has done this before, Shizuru said slowly. Meaning this world may not be the first target. That is what he is suggesting. Mizuki set down her tablet. That reframes the entire operational picture. It does, Shizuru agreed. She stood at the center of the room, and Issei watched her do the thing he was learning to recognize as her processing mode, that absolute stillness while something moved very quickly behind her eyes. If the architect has access to cross-dimensional tools and has used them before, then their interest in a Longinus-class sacred gear is not casual. It is a specific component in a larger project. My power as a part of something, Issei said. Not the objective itself. Yes. Then finding out what the larger project is matters as much as stopping the barrier manipulation. Yes, Shizuru said again. She looked at each of them in turn, that silver gaze moving with a deliberateness that was not dramatic but was clear. We have 72 hours, possibly fewer. We need to identify and disrupt at least one power node, gather enough intelligence on the architect's objectives to understand what we are actually fighting, and keep Issei out of syndicate custody. That is a full agenda, Tatsuru said, from behind his console. It is the agenda we have, Shizuru said. Rinko had already moved to the map table. Issei came to stand beside her, and the three of them looked at the distribution of marked anomalies across the regional terrain, at the geometry of distance and difficulty between their current position and the nearest possible node. This one, Rinko said, pointing to a mark 12 kilometers to the northwest. It is the smallest in magnitude, which may mean lower guard priority. And the terrain between here and their channels movement in a way that we can use. And if the magnitude is lower because it is a secondary node, Mizuki said from across the room, disrupting it causes them to redistribute load across the primary nodes, which will make those primary nodes more visible in energy signature terms. Showing us what they are protecting most, Issei said. Exactly. He looked at the map. 12 kilometers of difficult terrain in the direction opposite to the installation where mid-tier guards and an ancient power process waited, followed by a disruption action against a syndicate asset, followed by the response that disruption would inevitably generate. 24 hours ago he had been standing on a perfectly ordinary school rooftop. When do we leave? He asked. 3 hours, Shizuru said. Rest first. Both of you. She looked between Issei and Rinko. You are going to need it. In the quiet before the next operation, Issei sat with the tactical maps and thought about the architecture of what was happening. The architect had been patient. The architect had planned across dimensions and timelines and had access to tools that indicated either significant resources or significant knowledge or both. The architect had identified Issei specifically and had engineered a situation to bring him here. And now, through the simple accident of landing among people who were also fighting the syndicate, the architect's plan had acquired a complication it had presumably not factored in. Shizuru, Rinko, Mizuki. 3 people who had dedicated their lives to the principle that the things in the dark were everyone's problem, and that someone had to stand in the gap between those things and everyone who could not see them. 3 people whose different approaches, Shizuru's clarity, Rinko's precision, Mizuki's relentless analytical intelligence, fit together in a way that seemed almost structural, as if they had been assembled rather than coincidentally joined. Issei thought about Rias's peerage. About the way that group had formed, each person with their individual fractures and capabilities fitting into a whole that was more than the sum of its parts. He thought about Akino and Kaneko and Zenobia and Asia, about the specific gravity that comes from fighting alongside people you trust completely. He thought about the 3 women in the next room, one of whom was probably reviewing maps, one of whom was almost certainly sharpening something, and one of whom was definitely running statistical probability models on interdimensional energy node distribution. He had been in this world for less than 24 hours. It felt longer. Not unpleasantly. More like the feeling of a city you have visited before and cannot quite place until you round a corner and find the street you were unconsciously looking for. Boy, Drake said, in the deep quiet of the boosted gear's interior space. Yeah. Rest, the dragon said. You are going to need it. You are the second person to tell me that. Shizuru Kosaka is wise, Drake said. Rest. Issei smiled at the ceiling and, after a while, did. Chapter 8 The Node. The northwest approach was harder than the one the night before. The terrain climbed steadily through dense growth, the trees older and closer together, the undergrowth thick with the kind of root systems that exist in places that have not been managed by human hands. The moon was lower tonight, filtering less light through the canopy, and twice Issei would have misjudged his footing if Rinko had not been moving just ahead of him, her awareness of the terrain serving as a kind of navigation signal that he was learning to read. Shizuru was with them for the first 6 kilometers, then peeled off to a position on the eastern ridge that gave her a broader visibility angle on the surrounding terrain. She would cover their approach and withdrawal. 2 of us from here, Rinko said, when Shizuru's presence faded from their immediate range. You and me. You and me. They moved. The node was not what Issei had pictured when he heard the word. He had imagined something physical, an artifact, a constructed installation. What Rinko led him to, emerging from the tree line onto a rocky shelf that overlooked a shallow depression in the mountain terrain, was something more organic. A concentration. A location where the energy was thick in the same way that certain mountain springs are thick with minerals, the result of long accumulation rather than deliberate construction. But it had been worked. Someone had placed focusing elements around the perimeter of the depression, stone markers inscribed with the syndicate's working style, and those elements were drawing the accumulated energy into a coherent flow rather than letting it dissipate naturally. The focusing elements, Issei said. Remove them and the accumulated energy disperses, Rinko confirmed. The natural concentration will rebuild over time, but on a timeline of months, not days. How many? 6 around the perimeter. And 2 guards. Issei tracked the guards with his peripheral boosted gear awareness. 1 on the eastern approach to the depression, 1 circling the perimeter. Both significantly above scout class. The circling one, he said. She comes around the north side every 90 seconds. 45-second window when her sideline is away from the eastern marker. Rinko was already calibrating. I can reach 2 of the markers in that window. 1 approach, 2 removals, clean exit before she returns. 3 markers if I handle the eastern guard during the window. Quietly, she said. Quietly. Can you be quiet? I have improved, he said. Something of the almost smile quality was in her voice when she responded, even if he could not see her expression clearly in the dark. 60 seconds. The Eastern Guard was a demon of a different class from the Scouts, denser in energy signature, more deliberate in movement. It was conducting a real patrol rather than a loose monitoring circuit, and it had the kind of situational awareness that comes from experience rather than instinct. It did not hear Issei coming. He came down from the rocky shelf above its position in the brief window when Rinko's motion on the opposite side of the depression had its attention fractionally rotated, and the strike was clean, precise, targeted at the specific energy concentration points that Drake had identified as the equivalent of pressure points in supernatural beings. The guard went down and stayed down, immobilized rather than eliminated, which was Issei's preferred outcome when it was available. 3 seconds. Rinko was already at the first marker. They pulled the 6 focusing elements in 4 minutes, the circling guard's rhythm covering their movement with a cooperative regularity that would end the moment their actions registered on whatever central monitoring system the syndicate was running. Go, Rinko said, and they went. The dispersal of the node energy was visible even from the tree line, a slow ripple moving outward from the depression as the coherent flow lost its structure and began returning to the ambient state it had been pulled from. Issei watched it with boosted gear active and saw, in the broader energy landscape, exactly what Mizuki had predicted. The other nodes flared. 3 of the 5 remaining anomalies in the region spiked in intensity, as the barrier manipulation process attempted to compensate for the lost input. 2 of them remained at baseline, which meant they were either secondary nodes not part of the active process, or they were something else entirely. Do you see the pattern? Issei asked Rinko as they moved through the return route at a controlled run. 3 compensating, she said, not out of breath. 2 unchanged. The 2 unchanged ones. Either not part of the active network, she said, or protected well enough that they did not need to compensate. Or they are not nodes at all, Issei said. They are something else. Something the architect does not want us to see by having them react. Rinko ran in silence for 30 seconds. You think those 2 are the architect's actual key infrastructure? I think the architect is patient and smart, Issei said, and smart, patient people build redundancy into their systems and put their most important infrastructure where it will not react to a probe. Another 30 seconds. Tell Mizuki that when we get back, Rinko said. Already planning on it. They ran, and the forest moved around them like something with its own intentions, and somewhere behind them the energy of the disrupted node continued its slow return to the natural state of things, buying time that would have to be used very carefully. Shizuru met them at the rendezvous point on the eastern ridge, and the 3 of them made the return together, and there was a quality to that movement through the last kilometer of dark forest that Issei registered even in the operational focus of the immediate situation. They fit. Not in the way of long familiarity, not yet, they had been working together for less than 2 days. But in the way of genuine compatibility, the way that certain things slot together not because they have been worn to fit by long use but because they were made for approximately the same purpose. Shizuru's ranged attention and tactical authority. Rinko's terrain reading and precise close work. Issei's raw power and the particular quality of his awareness. Both Drake's ancient sensitivity and his own trained combat intuition. 3 different approaches to the same fundamental problem, moving through the same dark forest toward the same base, carrying the same information, working toward the same outcome. It was not familiar. It was the beginning of something that could become familiar. Issei held that thought carefully, the way you hold something that has not yet been named, and kept moving. Act 2, The Architect's Design. Chapter 9. Morning after. The base was different in the early morning. Issei had noticed this about operational environments before. They had a diurnal quality that had nothing to do with the actual lighting and everything to do with the particular texture of the silence at different hours. The base at 3 in the morning, when he had returned from the node operation with Rinko and Shizuru, had been charged, awake, humming with the nervous energy of people processing new information in real time. The base now, 5 hours later, with pale light filtering down through the tree root ventilation slots in the ceiling, had a different quality entirely. The settled quality of a place that had done its immediate work and was preparing for the next thing. Mizuki had been awake the entire time. Issei could tell because her tea had been refreshed 4 times, which he knew because he had been awake for 3 of those hours himself, unable to sleep past the 2-hour mark, and had watched her cycle through the ritual of getting up, heating water, returning to her screens with a fresh cup, without ever breaking the analytical flow she was maintaining. You should sleep, he said, from his position at the edge of the map table. I do not sleep well when I have incomplete data, Mizuki said, without looking up. That must mean you sleep very rarely. More rarely than is medically ideal, yes? She looked up then, and her expression was not the flat analytical surface that Issei was learning to read as her working face. There was something underneath it, the particular quality of someone who has been alone with their thoughts for long enough that they have started talking back. The 2 anomalies that did not react, she said. You have been running them all night. I have been running everything. But those 2 keep pulling me back. She turned her tablet so he could see the display. 2 points on the regional map, marked in a different color from the compensating nodes. They are not standard energy concentration sites. The signatures are too stable. Natural accumulation has variance, the way a river's flow has variance even in calm conditions. These are perfectly consistent, artificially stabilized, by something with extraordinary precision. Whatever is maintaining that stability, it is not a syndicate construct. Their inscription work is good, but it is not this refined. Issei leaned over the display. The 2 points were separated by approximately 30 kilometers, positioned at almost perfect geometric opposition relative to the main installation. A triangle, he said. The installation and the 2 stable anomalies form a triangle. Mizuki looked at him. Then looked at the map. Then back at him. I have been staring at this for 5 hours, she said. Fresh eyes. A geometric formation, she said, and the words had the quality of a door opening rather than a statement being made. She was already pulling up a different display, something with overlay analysis tools. If the installation is the processing center, and the two anomalies are anchor points for a triangular formation, the purpose would be containment or amplification, Issei said. Depending on the direction of flow. Amplification would mean the entire barrier region between the 3 points is being actively manipulated, not just the barrier points directly beneath the installation. An area how large? Mizuki ran the calculation. The number she arrived at made both of them quiet. That is not a regional incursion capability, Issei said. No, Mizuki said. At that scale, it is a dimensional restructuring. You would not be opening a door for an army. You would be removing the wall. The morning light in the base was steady and practical and made no comment on the weight of what they had just understood. Somewhere in the equipment room, something mechanical cycled through a maintenance routine with a soft, periodic click. Wake Shizuru, Mizuki said, and was already reorganizing her screens. They were all awake within 20 minutes, and the briefing that followed had the particular intensity of a group that has collectively understood something large enough to change the shape of everything that came before. Shizuru listened to Mizuki's analysis with complete attention. She asked 3 questions, each of them precisely targeted at the specific uncertainties in the model, and when she had the answers she stood very still for a moment in the way that Issei now recognized as her processing the implications rather than the information. How long has the triangular formation been operational? She asked. That is the critical unknown, Mizuki said. The 2 anchor points have stable signatures, which means they have been in place long enough to fully stabilize. Months minimum. Possibly years. Years, Shizuru repeated. The syndicate has been in this region for 2 years. If the anchor points predate their arrival, someone placed them before the syndicate moved in, Rinko said. She had been standing at the edge of the briefing space, arms crossed, with that particular listening quality that meant she was running the implications in parallel with Mizuki's presentation rather than after it. Which means the architect was here before the syndicate was. Or the architect is the syndicate, Issei said. Not a person working through them but the actual founding intelligence behind the entire organization. Everyone looked at him. Our working model has been architect as leader of the syndicate, Mizuki said slowly. Which implies an organization that existed and was then shaped by a directing intelligence. What if it was built specifically for this purpose? Issei said. What if the syndicate is not an organization that acquired a powerful leader but an instrument that was constructed for a single operation? You build the instrument, you run it for years building up to the actual objective, and the people in the syndicate do not even know that everything they have done has been preparation for one specific moment. Mizuki sat down. Shizuru did not sit down, but there was a quality to her stillness that had changed. If that is true, Shizuru said, then the syndicate's operational patterns across 2 years are not the activities of an organization building capability. They are the steps of a very long preparation sequence. And the barrier manipulation at the installation, Rinko said, is not the beginning of the architect's plan. It is the final step. The clock we are working against, Issei said, is not 72 hours to a significant threat. It is 72 hours to the completion of something that has been running for years. The click of the maintenance cycle in the equipment room seemed very loud in the silence that followed. All right, Shizuru said. The 2 words carried everything about her, the clarity, the unwillingness to perform uncertainty, the willingness to simply face what was true. Then we have less time than we thought, higher stakes than we estimated, and considerably more to do. How do we feel about that? Tatsuru said from his corner. Focused, Shizuru said. We feel focused. Mizuki, I need a complete analysis of the triangular formation and projections on what a full activation would do to this region. Rinko, map the approach routes to both anchor points. Issei. She looked at him. I need Drake's assessment of what class of dimensional restructuring this formation is capable of, and whether there are any power sources in his experience that could anchor the kind of sustained output we are looking at. I will ask him now. Good. She looked at the group as a whole. We have an advantage. We understand the architecture of what is happening before the architect expects us to. We use that. And then she moved, with the calm purposefulness of someone who has decided that the size of the obstacle is the size of the commitment required and has made that commitment, and the base came alive around her. Chapter 10, Drake Speaks. The conversation with Drake took longer than Issei had expected. He sat in the equipment room with his back against the wall and his eyes closed, which was the posture that made the internal communication clearest, and he presented the triangular formation model to the ancient dragon the way you present evidence to a judge, everything organized, nothing editorialized. Drake was quiet for longer than usual. When dragons are quiet, Issei had learned, it generally means one of two things. Either they are processing something that requires significant computational effort, or they are deciding how much to share. Drake did both. I know what this is, the dragon said finally. Tell me. In my experience of dimensional mechanics, which spans more iterations of this universe and others than your mathematics can currently describe, there is a category of operation that your world's supernatural scholars have never encountered because the resources required to execute it are beyond any single faction in your world's history. A pause. What the formation you have described is building toward is called a resonance cascade. Which means, imagine two tuning forks, Drake said, with the particular patience of something very old explaining something to something very young without condescension. Strike one and the other vibrates in sympathy if they share the same frequency. Now apply that principle to dimensional barriers. Two universes that share enough structural similarity can be made to resonate. When they reach a sufficient resonance point, the barriers between them do not break. They become transparent, permeable in both directions, simultaneously, across a region determined by the size of the resonance formation. Two universes, Issei said. My world and this one. Yes. The formation in this world is one half of the apparatus. The other half is in your world. Issei opened his eyes. The equipment room ceiling stared back at him, practical and unhelpful. There is a corresponding formation in my world, he said. The rift that brought me here was not just pulling me. It was testing the resonance. Checking that the frequency match was correct. Precise, Drake said. You were a calibration instrument. The boosted gear's energy signature is known across many dimensions by entities old enough to have encountered my previous bearers. Using it as a tuning reference would allow a dimensional architect of sufficient sophistication to fine-tune the resonance to a specific target frequency. They used me to find the exact settings, Issei said. And then the scouts came to retrieve the instrument before it caused complications. Which you caused anyway. Yeah. I tend to do that. He absorbed this. What happens when the cascade completes? What does a transparent barrier mean in practical terms? In practical terms, every entity in this world with the ability to move freely through dimensions gains unrestricted access to your world, without the normal cost of dimensional crossing. And every entity in your world gains equivalent access to this one. The supernatural infrastructure of both universes becomes entangled. That sounds catastrophic for both sides. It is catastrophic for both sides if the transition is uncontrolled, Drake said. But if someone controlled the formation and therefore controlled the transition, they would be positioned as the arbiter of access between two supernatural worlds. Anything that wanted to move between dimensions would require their permission or their technology. A tollgate, Issei said. Between two universes. An extraordinarily powerful position, the dragon agreed. Every faction, devil, angel, fallen angel, Taimanin, syndicate, everything in both worlds, would need to deal with the person holding that gate. It would be the single most powerful strategic position in the history of either universe. Issei sat with that for a long moment. And the architect has been building toward this for years, he said. With patience, Drake said. And intelligence. And a complete willingness to use everything and everyone as a component in the design. Including me. Including you? Issei stood up. His hands were steady, which he noted with the part of his mind that had learned to monitor its own state in high-stakes situations. Not because he was not affected by what he had just understood, he was. But because the understanding had arrived alongside a very clear sense of what it required. Tell me about the power source, he said. You said you would assess what class of dimensional restructuring this is. What powers a resonance cascade? The formation draws on the accumulated dimensional stress at the barrier points, Drake said. Decades of natural stress built into the fabric of two universes that have been proximate to each other for longer than human civilization in either has existed. You cannot create that energy. But you can harness it if you build the right apparatus. Which means we cannot simply destroy the power source, Issei said. The energy is inherent to the dimensional structure itself. Correct. What you can destroy are the focusing elements. The formation's architecture. Remove the anchor points or the processing center, and the accumulated stress discharges without control rather than in a controlled cascade. An uncontrolled discharge of that magnitude would be significantly less catastrophic than a controlled cascade in terms of strategic consequences, Drake said. Potentially damaging to the immediate area of the formation. But it would not create a permanent gate. It would simply be a large, messy release of dimensional energy that this world's supernatural structures would absorb over time. So we need to take out the anchor points, or the installation. Yes. And you need to do it before the cascade completes. Because once it completes, the formation becomes self-sustaining, Drake said. Remove it after that point and the uncontrolled discharge would be proportional to the completed rather than the partial cascade. The consequences at that scale are not recoverable. Issei went to find the others. Chapter 11, What We Are Fighting For. The briefing table had been reconfigured. Mizuki had printed, on actual paper, a series of diagrams showing the triangular formation and its projected operational parameters, and these were spread across the table alongside the regional maps and tactical overlays. Tatsuru had pulled the three-dimensional terrain model onto the main display. Rinko had marked the approach routes to both anchor points in 4 different colors, indicating primary approach, secondary approach, withdrawal vector, and emergency alternative. They were ready to hear what Issei had learned. He told them everything. He laid it out the way Drake had laid it out for him, systematic, nothing soft-pedaled, because these were people who operated in reality rather than comfortable versions of it, and giving them anything less would have been an insult, and a strategic liability in equal measure. Mizuki listened with the particular quality of someone whose existing model is being revised at a fundamental level. She did not resist the revision. She absorbed it, and began immediately reconstructing the picture around the new information. Rinko's expression did not change significantly, but the texture of her attention shifted in the way Issei was learning to read as a sign that something had landed somewhere important. Shizuru's face was still. When he finished, she looked at the triangular formation diagram for a long moment without speaking. The formation in your world, she said finally. Who is managing it? Unknown, Issei said. Drake's theory is that the architect has an equivalent apparatus in place there, operated by whoever the architect has managing that end of the project. If we disrupt the formation here, does the one in your world automatically fail? Issei had asked Drake the same question. Not automatically. But without the corresponding resonance from this side, it cannot complete. It would be like one of the tuning forks being removed. The other one still vibrates, but it has nothing to resonate with. So we focus here, Shizuru said. This world, this formation, this timeline. Yes. She was quiet again. Mizuki and Rinko were also quiet, but in their different ways, Mizuki's quiet being the productive silence of active reconstruction and Rinko's being the settled silence of someone who has already processed the strategic picture and is waiting for the operational question. It was Tatsuru who spoke. Can I say something? He did not wait for permission, which Issei was starting to think was his characteristic mode. When we started this operation, we were looking at a regional threat. Syndicate destabilizing some barrier points, possible incursion vector. Now we are looking at a deliberate plan to make 2 supernatural universes permanently entangled under one controlling entity's authority. He paused. That is not a Taimanin operation. That is a coalition operation. We need to call in help. He is not wrong, Mizuki said. Shizuru looked at Tatsuru with the kind of look that carries a complicated history in it. Who do we call? The Taimanin Council will move too slowly, Rinko said. Authentication, verification, deployment, by the time they commit to a response the cascade will have completed. There are independent operators, Mizuki said. Some with significant capability. If I send the intelligence package and the timeline, Those who understand what the formation means will respond. How many, in this region, with sufficient capability to matter? Mizuki thought. 3, possibly 4. Possibly more if they pass the information along. Send it, Shizuru said. Use the secure channel. Full intelligence package, no redactions. And my people, Issei said. Everyone looked at him again. He was getting accustomed to being the thing people looked at when something unexpected entered the conversation. In my world, he said, there are people with the capability and the motivation to respond to this. I cannot communicate with them directly from here, but if the architect has an operation running in my world, there is a chance that my absence has already triggered investigation. People who know me well enough will have started looking. Can you send a message? Mizuki asked. Through the dimensional barrier? Not a standard message. But Drag has connections. He paused. He has been the boosted gear for a very long time. He has relationships with entities on both sides of the barrier that are not constrained by normal dimensional limits. It is not reliable and it is not fast, but it is something. Do it, Shizuru said. He did, sitting back in the chair at the edge of the table and closing his eyes for the 3-minute concentration it required to work through Drag's channels, sending what the dragon described as a resonance imprint along the dimensional pathways that something as ancient as the Red Dragon had established across more realities than Issei could count. Not a message in any language. More like a frequency, a signature, Issei's specific energy pattern broadcast outward like a lighthouse signal. It would not say anything. But to anyone sensitive enough to read it, it would say he was alive and located and in a situation requiring attention. When he opened his eyes, Rinko was watching him. Done, he said. Good. She returned her attention to the approach routes. We have approximately 54 hours remaining on the formation timeline. The most efficient sequence is to take the eastern anchor point in 14 hours, rest 6, take the western anchor point, rest 4, then address the installation processing center with whatever additional support Mizuki's contacts can provide. Sequential rather than simultaneous, Shizuru said. We do not have the numbers for simultaneous. Not yet, Mizuki said. She was already at her communications equipment, fingers moving with the focused precision of someone who has a great deal to transmit, and no time to waste. Not yet, Shizuru agreed. Issei looked at the triangular formation diagram. He looked at the line from the eastern anchor to the installation, and the line from the installation to the western anchor, and the line closing the triangle back to the east. A structure that had been years in the making, built in patient layers by someone who had been operating on a scale and timeline that no one had recognized until it was nearly complete. He thought about Rias, somewhere on the other side of the dimensional barrier, probably furious and definitely worried and absolutely already looking. He thought about the 3 women in this room with him, their different competencies and their shared commitment and the particular quality of trust that had formed between him and them in less than 48 hours. The kind of trust that forms fast when the circumstances require it, and the people involved are the kind of people who build it by showing rather than promising. All right, he said. Eastern anchor point. Tell me everything Mizuki has on the terrain. Chapter 12, Before the Storm. There were 8 hours before the eastern approach would begin. Shizuru mandated sleep for Rinko and Issei, which Rinko accepted without argument, and Issei accepted with the understanding that arguing would be pointless and possibly counterproductive given the operational logic of the mandate. He managed 4 hours, dreamless and heavy, which was good enough. When he woke, the base was quieter than it had been at any point since his arrival. Tatsuru was asleep at his console, which Issei suspected was his standard rest configuration. Mizuki was at her station, but her eyes were closed, and her breathing had the depth of genuine sleep rather than closed-eye concentration. The communications equipment was running on automated protocols, Mizuki having set whatever needed to be set before finally surrendering to the physical reality that her brain needed maintenance. Shizuru was in the corridor between the operations room and the equipment room, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, and her eyes open and a cup of tea in her hands that was still steaming. Issei sat down on the opposite wall. She looked at him. No assessment in it this time, or if there was, it was a different quality of assessment from the threat mapping of their first encounter. You sleep lightly, she said. Combat training. Once you have woken up mid-fight enough times, sleeping lightly becomes the default. She nodded, the small precise nod that was one of her characteristic responses to things she found accurate. You managed it though, she said. Sleep. 4 hours. Enough. She looked at the corridor wall, which was stone, and had the same inscription markings as everything else in the base, and presumably said nothing more interesting than standard protective notation. The formation in your world, she said. Not a question, not quite an opener for a conversation, more like something she had been holding and had decided to say aloud. Yeah, people you care about are near it. Whatever apparatus is operating on that end. Yes, and you cannot reach them. Not beyond the signal I sent through Drake. She was quiet. The steam rose from her cup in the cool air of the corridor, steady and unhurried. I know what that is like, she said. Having people you are responsible to on a different side of a situation you cannot directly affect. Rinko? Issei said. Shizuru looked at him. She was my student, before she was my partner. For a period of her training, I was on a different assignment. Very difficult terrain, very isolated. She went through something significant during that time without me available. She paused. She handled it with complete capability. She did not need me. But I did not know that until I came back. The not knowing, Issei said, is its own category of hard, she said. Yes. They sat with that for a moment, the shared understanding of people who carry others inside them in the specific way that comes from genuine responsibility rather than ownership. Can I ask you something? Issei said. You can ask. The Taimanin. You said it is a responsibility. Not an organization, not a title. A responsibility. Yes. How do you carry it? The weight of being the person who stands between everything the people around you cannot see? She considered the question with the same care she seemed to give everything. You build a structure, she said. Not of ambition or obligation. Of purpose. You know very clearly what you are doing and why, and the clarity itself becomes load-bearing. The weight does not go away, but it is distributed across something that can hold it. Purpose, Issei said. And the people who share it. She looked at him with that clear, direct gaze. You do the same thing. In your world. The structure of how you carry it looks different from ours, but it functions the same way. Issei thought about Rias and her household. About the specific way that a group of people committed to the same purpose became something structural. Something that held you up instead of simply surrounding you. Yeah, he said. It does. Shizuru sipped her tea. Issei did not have tea, but he was comfortable without it. The corridor was quiet and the base was quietly breathing around them, and the weight of what was coming tomorrow sat with them not oppressively but simply, as facts do. Try to rest more, she said after a while. You too. I will, she said, in a tone that suggested she might even mean it. Issei went back to his cot. This time he slept 3 more hours, and if he was aware, in the deep background of those hours, of the particular quality of the base around him, of the sound of Mizuki's automated systems, and the distant almost inaudible presence of Rinko somewhere in the facility, it was not a waking awareness. It was the kind of awareness that does not disturb sleep. The kind that means, for the first time in 48 hours, a place feels like it might be safe. Chapter 13, Eastern Anchor. The eastern anchor point was 17 kilometers from the base, and the terrain between them was the most demanding Issei had moved through since arriving in this world. The forest gave way to a transitional zone of older growth and exposed rock, the trees thinning as the elevation increased, the ground becoming progressively more uneven in the way that geological time creates uneven ground, not the random ruggedness of erosion, but the deliberate seeming architecture of deep tectonic process. Ridgelines that had been created by forces operating over timescales that made the architect's 2-year operation look like a morning's work. All 3 of them were moving this time. Mizuki and Tatsuru were at the base, managing communications and monitoring the regional energy signature network for any change in the formation's operational parameters. If the formation accelerates, Mizuki had said before they left, I will signal. We have 3 frequencies. 1 means proceed, 2 means pause, 3 means abort immediately. And if we get 3? Issei had asked. Move as fast as you can back to the base, Mizuki had said. and hope the acceleration is an anomaly rather than a transition. They had been moving for 2 hours when Rinko stopped. It was not the dramatic stop of someone who has spotted something alarming. It was quieter than that, a deceleration from her standard pace to stillness that looked from the outside like she had simply decided to stand rather than walk. But Issei had been moving with her long enough now to know the difference between pausing and stopping, and this was stopping. Shizuru was already covering northeast, reading whatever Rinko had read. Issei let his awareness extend through boosted gear. For signatures higher than scout class, approximately 200 meters ahead. They were not moving. They were positioned, which meant they were waiting, which meant they were expected. They knew we were coming, he said, very quietly. Not necessarily, Rinko said, equally quiet. The anchor point is a fixed objective. If you know someone is trying to disrupt your formation, and you know where the anchor points are, you reinforce them. It does not require knowing our specific timeline. But they have had time to set, Shizuru said. They have been in position for at least an hour. The positioning is not reactive, it is prepared. Which means they knew the anchor point was a likely target, Issei said. Which means they know we understand the formation. Possibly, Rinko said. Possibly they are simply defending all the critical components, and this is standard defensive posture rather than specific intelligence about our understanding. Either way, Shizuru said, for stationary high-class opponents at a fixed position that we need to reach. Yeah, Issei said. Options. I can approach from below the ridgeline and come up directly beneath the defensive position, Rinko said. The rock formation gives cover for approximately 60 meters of approach. And the last 40 meters? Are open, she said. I need them looking elsewhere for 15 seconds. I can give you that, Issei said. Shizuru looked at him. You are going to draw fire from 4 high-class syndicate guards. Not from, he said. At. There is a difference. He checked boosted gear, which was running at its normalized level now, the dimensional adjustment Drake had mentioned having completed overnight. I am not at full capacity, but I am significantly above scout class. I can manage 4 for 15 seconds. Can you manage 4 for 30? Rinko asked. Comfortably. I will need 25 to be thorough. Then 30 gives us margin. She looked at him with that measuring quality. You will take damage. Probably. Devils are durable. That is an impressively calm way to volunteer for that. I have done it before, he said. Being the one everyone's attention is on while someone else does the actual critical work. It is a defined role and I am good at it. Something in Rinko's expression said she was adding this to the file she kept internally on who Issei Hyoudou was and what he was made of. Shizuru was watching the ridgeline. 30 seconds, she said. Rinko, you go around on my signal. Issei, you give her the window. I will cover the eastern approach in case there are additional units behind the ridge. Ready, Rinko said. Ready, Issei said, and let boosted gear off the suppression he had been maintaining since they left the base. The crimson glow hit the rock face around him like a sunrise, sudden and impossible in the dark terrain, and the 4 signatures ahead reacted instantly, attention snapping to his position with the speed of trained combatants identifying a genuine threat. Good. He went toward them. 30 seconds was the plan. He gave Rinko 45. The 4 guards were not scout class. They were significantly above it, the syndicate's actual combat assets rather than their reconnaissance units. And they fought with the kind of coordinated competence that comes from units that have drilled together. They used the terrain well, using the ridgeline and the rock formations to deny him clean angles, forcing him to close distance if he wanted to engage rather than simply absorbing their attacks from the outside. He closed distance. It was Messier. He took a strike across the left shoulder from the largest of them that would have ended a fight with someone of lower durability. And he took a multi-directional pulse from 2 of them working in combination that drove him back 12 meters and cost him the momentum of the approach. His shoulder was going to be very loud about its opinions for the next few hours. But he kept their attention completely and absolutely. When the anchor point's energy signature changed, he felt it even in the middle of the exchange, the specific shift of a focusing element being removed, and then another, and the deep pulse of the anchor's contribution to the triangular formation beginning to scatter rather than flow. The guards felt it too. The change in their behavior was immediate, attention fragmenting, two of them breaking from the engagement to move toward the anchor point location, and that was the moment when Shizuru arrived from the east with a strike that hit the largest guard with enough precision and force to put it down, and Rinko was back over the ridge already, clean and unhurt, with the last two focusing elements in her hands. The anchor point scattered its energy in a slow exhale. The two guards who had broken toward it stopped, stood for a moment with the uncertain quality of things that have lost their primary directive, and then withdrew with significantly less organization than they had maintained during the engagement. That is what retreat looks like when it is fear-based rather than tactical, Rinko observed. You are unusually clinical about everything, Issei said, rolling his damaged shoulder with a hiss. You are injured, she said, and it was not clinical at all. It was immediate and direct in the way that genuine concern is when it is not filtered through social performance. It is manageable. Show me. He showed her. She examined the shoulder with practiced hands and efficient attention, and her expression, while she did it, had the quality of someone cataloging severity rather than performing empathy, which was, in Issei's experience, what genuine medical concern actually looked like in people who had done this many times in the field. Bruise deeply, she said. The joint capsule is intact. You will have full function. You will also have significant pain for approximately 48 hours. I know the feeling, he said. Shizuru had completed her sweep of the ridgeline perimeter and returned, and she looked at Issei's shoulder and then at Rinko, who gave a small nod that communicated the summary assessment. Shizuru filed it and moved on. One anchor point down, she said. One to go. The western point in 11 hours. And then the installation, Issei said. And then the installation, she agreed. Let us get back. They moved back through the ridge terrain with the eastern anchor point dispersing behind them, and Issei held his damaged shoulder carefully, and watched Rinko's path finding ahead of him and felt the particular quality of something shared, the specific weight of a fight survived together, settling into the record of who they were to each other. Chapter 14, Contact. Mizuki had news. The communications console was active with several inbound channels when they returned, and Tatsuru had the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone who had been managing more simultaneous urgent inputs than he was ideally staffed for. Mizuki was at the main screen with the focused quality of someone processing good and complicated information at the same time. 3 responses from independent operators, she said, before they had fully cleared the entrance. All confirmed. 2 will reach our operational area within 6 hours. The 3rd is farther out, 12 hours. Names? Shizuru asked. Ingrid and Koga from the Northern Network. They have worked together before, strong complementary capabilities. Mizuki paused. And Kurenai Shinjo. A quality entered the room that Issei did not have enough context to fully decode. Shizuru's expression shifted fractionally. Rinko's posture changed in a way that was too subtle to name, but that was definitely a change. Kurenai responded, Shizuru said. Within 40 minutes of my transmission, Mizuki said. She was already in the region. Of course she was, Shizuru said. Not with displeasure. With the quality of someone acknowledging that a very familiar pattern has reasserted itself. Is Kurenai someone I should know about? Issei asked. She is a senior Taimanin, Rinko said. Exceptional capability. Extremely independent operational style. She and Shizuru have a history. Of cooperation or conflict? Both, Shizuru said. Simultaneously, on multiple occasions. She seemed to decide something. She is an asset. Whatever the interpersonal dynamics, she is an asset. There is also, Mizuki said, with a careful quality, a response from the dimensional monitoring network. Everyone's attention sharpened. Drake's resonance signal? Issei asked. Something is responding from the other side of the barrier, Mizuki said. I cannot interpret the signal directly. It is not in any format I have encountered. But it is a response, and it is definitely directed at your specific location. Issei closed his eyes for a moment, and reached inward. Drake was already there, and the dragon's presence had a quality to it that Issei had not felt since arriving in this world, the brightness of someone who has received word from a long-separated colleague. Who is it? Issei asked. The Great Red, Drake said, with unmistakable satisfaction. Issei opened his eyes. What is it? Rinko asked. A dragon, Issei said. The dragon, actually. The one that exists in the dimensional space between worlds. If it has picked up the signal, it means the dimensional pathway between this world and mine is active enough to carry information in both directions. Which means someone on my side knows I am here. And it means the barrier is thinner than it was, which supports the formation's progress. But it also means that the people looking for me now have a signal they can track. He paused. This got more complicated in two different directions at the same time. That is the standard operating condition of a crisis, Shizuru said. It really is, he agreed. Mizuki had already begun integrating the new information into the operational timeline. With Ingrid, Koga, and Kurenai available, we have enough capability for a two-pronged final approach. Western anchor point and installation simultaneously, rather than sequentially. If the western anchor point falls at the same time as we hit the installation, Shizuru said, the formation loses two of its three structural components at once. It cannot compensate for both simultaneously. The discharge when it collapses, Issei said, will be significant. How significant? Mizuki asked. Issei checked with Drake. The answer was complicated. Regional scale. Not catastrophic, but significant. The immediate area of the formation triangle, roughly the region bounded by the 3 points, will experience what Drake calls a dimensional pressure wave. Not lethal for most entities but disorienting, and it will likely disable any active supernatural workings in the area for a period, including our own capabilities, Rinko said, for a few minutes. Possibly up to 15. Then we plan for a 15-minute operational blackout after the formation collapses, Shizuru said. Everyone in their correct position before the collapse. And whoever is in the installation when it collapses, Issei said. Needs to be prepared for that, Shizuru said, and looked at him. I am going in, he said. Before the collapse. I need to find the processing center and disable it, and I need to find out if the architect is physically present. Not alone, Rinko said. No, Shizuru agreed. Not alone. Then who comes with me? Rinko and Shizuru looked at each other. The conversation their eyes conducted was brief. We both do, Shizuru said. Chapter 15, Kurenai. Kurenai Shinjo arrived 4 hours before the planned operation, which was 2 hours ahead of her estimated arrival time, which Tatsuru noted with a slight expression of unsurprisedness. She was tall, with the kind of presence that takes up exactly as much space as it requires and does not apologize for it. Her hair was red, worn in a way that was neither military practical nor civilian casual but somewhere specific to her, and her eyes had the quality of someone who is always calculating the distance between where they are and where they need to be. She looked at Issei with no pretense of subtlety. So you are the thing from another universe, she said. Issei Hyoudou, he said. Yes, Kurenai Shinjo. She did not offer her hand. She did not offer it as a statement. She simply did not, the way some people's version of introduction does not include that gesture. Your sacred gear is a Longinus? Boosted gear. Red Dragon Emperor. And your dragon's assessment of the formation, she said, already moving toward Mizuki's screens, is the resonance cascade model? Yes. Then he is right. She scanned the displayed data with the speed of someone who reads operational intelligence the way other people read text. I have seen precursor formations to this twice before, both abandoned before completion for reasons I did not understand until now. The architect has been attempting this operation across multiple locations. Everyone in the room went still. You know the architect, Shizuru said. I know of them, Kurenai said. I have never identified them directly. But I have been tracking operational patterns that I now understand are all the same signature, the same patience, the same long horizon design across 3 different regions over approximately 7 years. 7 years, Mizuki said. The previous 2 attempts failed, Kurenai said. At the anchor point construction phase, which was earlier in the sequence than this current operation. This is the furthest any attempt has gotten. Why did the previous attempts fail? Rinko asked. Operational disruption in both cases. Forces that were not aware of the formation's purpose nevertheless disrupted the anchor points as part of other operations against those regions' supernatural threats. Kurenai paused. This one got further because this region was quieter. Less active opposition. The syndicate operated here without serious interference for 2 years. Until us, Shizuru said. Until you. Kurenai's gaze returned to Issei. And until an element the architect did not anticipate. A sacred gear from another universe, Issei said. A sacred gear bearer who fought differently from what the retrieval operation was designed for, she said. The retrieval operation assumed acquisition or neutralization. You were neither acquired nor neutralized, and you immediately integrated with an opposition unit of significant capability. That was not in the architect's model. You know the model, Shizuru said. I have spent 4 years studying the operational patterns, Kurenai said. Yes, I know the model well enough to recognize when something has fallen outside it. The room held a particular quality for a moment, the quality of significant information landing in a space where it would have to be integrated quickly. Shizuru looked at Kurenai with that clear, measuring gaze, and something passed between them that was not quite a history lesson and not quite a resumption of trust, but was the working version of both. Then I need everything you know, Shizuru said. All of it. We have 4 hours. Sit down, Kurenai said, and began. The picture that assembled itself over the next 90 minutes was both more complete and more alarming than what they had constructed before Kurenai's arrival. The architect was not an organization and not a faction representative. Every pattern Kurenai had traced pointed toward a single individual of exceptional dimensional engineering capability who had been operating alone, using constructed tools and recruited organizations and patient long-horizon strategy to compensate for the limits of operating without institutional support. Someone who had attempted and failed twice and had returned to the project a 3rd time with adjustments made for the failure modes. They know why the previous attempts failed, Kurenai said. Which means they have analyzed the disruption events and built redundancy into this attempt. The 2 anomalies that did not react when we disrupted the first node, Mizuki said. The anchor points? The anchor points were a redundancy, Kurenai confirmed. The formation can complete with only 1 anchor point active if the processing center compensates for the lost input. Then taking the eastern anchor point did not buy us as much time as we thought, Issei said. It bought time, Kurenai said. Just less of it. The processing center is now running at a higher output to compensate. Which means the timeline has compressed. Mizuki ran the updated calculation. The number was not 44 hours. 31 hours, she said. The room recalibrated. Then we do not wait for Ingrid and Koga, Shizuru said. Ingrid and Koga arrive in 5 hours, Mizuki said. 26 hours remaining at that point. Sufficient for a full operation if we move immediately. It is tight, Rinko said. It is what we have, Shizuru said. Kurenai was looking at the installation map with an expression that was close to something Issei had only seen in one other operational context. Someone who has been hunting something for a very long time and can see, for the first time, the moment when the hunt ends. The architect will be at the installation, she said. In person. You are certain? Shizuru asked. The previous failures happened when the architect was managing remotely. They would not make that mistake a 3rd time. She was quiet for a moment. This is the completion event. 7 years of work. They will be there. The weight of that sat in the room. Then that is where we go, Issei said. Chapter 16. The Hours Between. Ingrid and Koga arrived in the 4th hour, moving through the base entrance with the ease of people who had used facilities like this many times before. Ingrid was quiet and rangy with eyes that processed everything in the room in the first 3 seconds and then stilled into a watchful steadiness. Koga was her operational opposite in most visible ways, broader, louder in the way he occupied space, but underneath it was the same thorough professional assessment. They looked at Issei with the by now familiar reaction of people encountering a sacred gear in a world where that was unprecedented. He fights well, Rinko told them, which Issei was learning to understand as her version of a comprehensive endorsement. Both of them nodded and moved on. The final planning session ran 2 hours. 6 people around the map table, the operational picture more complete than it had been at any point, the moving parts distributed among them with the clarity that comes from people who all understand the same stakes and have stopped managing each other's understanding of them. The plan was 3 simultaneous actions. Ingrid and Koga, with Tatsuru managing their communications, would take the western anchor point. Their approach was clean and their capabilities were well matched to the task. The anchor point's guards had been reinforced, Mizuki's monitoring indicated, but not beyond what Ingrid and Koga's combined operational profile could handle. Kurenai would be the mobile element, moving through the outer perimeter of the installation to identify and disrupt the Syndicate's external command structure in the moments after the anchor points fell, preventing any organized response from reaching the processing center. Shizuru, Rinko, and Issei would go into the installation. The processing center is underground, Shizuru said, tracing the route on the map with a precision that carried 2 days of accumulated intelligence. The secondary entrance Rinko identified. That is our way in. The defensive array is older and incompletely integrated, which is our advantage. Issei, once we are inside, you will feel the processing center's output before we see it. Drake can track it, Issei confirmed. Then you guide us to it. Rinko and I handle anything that tries to stop us getting there. You handle the processing center itself. Handle how? The focusing elements in the processing center will be the most sophisticated we have encountered, Shizuru said. They will not come out with a physical removal the way the node and anchor markers did. They will require something capable of disrupting a sustained high-output dimensional energy process. Dragon fire, Issei said. Can you produce it without the armor configuration? In a controlled pulse? Yes. It will be expensive, but yes. Then that is the plan, Shizuru said. Questions? No one had questions. They had concerns, which were different, and they held those individually because the concerns were the kind that do not improve from being voiced in a planning session. The session ended. People dispersed to prepare. Issei found himself outside. The base had an external access point besides the main tree root entrance, a narrow gap in the rock face that opened onto a small ledge overlooking the forests below. Issei had found it on his second day and had been using it when the enclosed space of the base became insufficient for the particular quality of thought he was trying to do. The forest at evening was a gradient of greens going to golds going to the deep blue-gray of pre-dark. The air was cold and sharp with pine and with the faint, unidentifiable chemical undertone that had been present since he arrived, which he had decided was simply a characteristic of the ambient supernatural content of this world's atmosphere. He heard Rinko before he saw her, which was an achievement on her part given how close she had to get before the sound registered. She settled on the ledge beside him, not immediately speaking, which was characteristic. She had a quality of comfort with silence that Issei associated with people who had spent significant time alone in difficult conditions and had learned to be genuinely rather than performatively comfortable in their own company. "How is your shoulder?" she asked finally. "Manageable. You keep using that word. It keeps being accurate." A small silence. Below them, something moved in the forest canopy, a large bird adjusting its position on a high branch. "When this is over," Rinko said, "you will go back." It was a statement, not a question. The statement of someone identifying a fact rather than asking about a preference. "Yes," Issei said. "If the cascade is disrupted, the dimensional barrier restores to its natural state. With the Great Red's involvement and Drake's guidance, there should be a pathway." "Good," she said. He looked at her. "Good? You have people on the other side who are concerned," she said. "It would be wrong for you not to return to them." "Yeah," he said. The bird below them made a sound that was both familiar and slightly wrong, the way everything in this world carried a frequency that was almost but not quite the version of itself from his own. "I will not pretend," Rinko said, with the precision of someone choosing every word with intention, "that the past 3 days have not been significant. They have been. Working with you. The way you fight. The way you think. The way you chose to stand between 4 enemies and us and held for 45 seconds when we asked for 30. She paused. The evening light was doing something particular to the forest below, layering shadow and gold in a way that made it look like something painted. "Significant," Issei said. "Yes." He looked at her profile, at the precise clean lines of her face and the quality of steadiness in it, and he understood something that he filed carefully, in the place where important things are filed when the time is not right to do more than file them. "After this," he said. "After this," she agreed. It was not a promise of anything specific. It was an acknowledgement of the thing that was true, the thing that existed in the space of the last 3 days, and a deferral of everything it might mean to a moment when there was time to think about what it meant. Rinko Akiyama was the kind of person who understood deferred conversations, and she nodded once with the quality of someone who has accepted a deferred conversation and will hold it carefully until the right moment arrives. They sat with the evening in the forest for a while longer, and it was not uncomfortable. Nothing between them ever really was. Chapter 17, The Installation. They moved out at midnight. The forest was completely dark and the moon was behind clouds, and the three of them moved through the terrain with the combined capability of two of the finest Taimanin in the region and a devil whose dragon was running at full capacity for the first time since the dimensional crossing. Drake was bright and present in a way he had not been since before the rift. The dimensional adjustment had fully completed, and the dragon's awareness through the sacred gear was sharp in every direction, cataloging the installation's energy field with the thoroughness of something that had been alive long enough to develop a very refined sensitivity to exactly this kind of supernatural engineering. Processing center is deep, Drake said. Below the primary underground level. There is a secondary chamber that the inscriptions on the surface did not account for. They built deeper than we mapped, Issei murmured. Yes. But the energy signature is clear. I can guide you to it. Tell me when we are close enough for the floor plan to matter. You will know, Drake said, with characteristic confidence. The outer wall appeared from the forest the way things appear at night when you know they are there, not a surprise but a confirmation, the dark mass of the installation rising from the rock face with a weight that was both structural and something heavier than structural. Rinko went first to the secondary entrance. It was exactly where she had identified it, 40 meters east along the outer wall from the primary gate, set at a lower level than its surroundings in a way that suggested it had been built into an existing geological feature rather than excavated cleanly. The inscription density around it was lower. The array markings were older, as she had assessed. She examined it for 90 seconds with hands and eyes, running the same systematic reading she had given it at the initial reconnaissance. The integration gap is here, she said quietly, indicating a section of the wall face 2 meters from the entrance frame. The old array and the new system have a 2-second non-overlapping response cycle. We move in the gap. How do you know it is 2 seconds? Issei asked. The inscription cycle interval on the old array is 7 seconds. The new system runs on a 5-second cycle. They align every 35 seconds and the non-overlap is at the alignment offset. You read that from the marks? Yes. In the dark? Yes. He decided not to pursue further inquiry on this topic. Shizuru was watching the outer perimeter from their position, tracking the surveillance pattern. She raised a hand. They waited. The hand dropped. 2 seconds. They moved. Inside was stone and blue-tinted artificial light, and the constant low-frequency vibration of the processing center's output, felt more than heard, the kind of vibration that lives in the chest rather than the ears. Drake immediately intensified his guidance, the directional sense becoming as precise as a compass. Down. Further down. The processing center was beneath their current level, accessible through a passage that the base's visible construction did not account for, which Mizuki would need to know about for any future intelligence updates if they survived to provide them. Rinko moved through the interior with the same seamless quality as the exterior terrain. Shizuru coordinated their positioning without sound, through gesture and the specific use of relative position that communicated tactical intent to someone trained to read it. They avoided 3 separate guard positions. The fourth one did not avoid them. It was in the corridor that led to the sublevel access, a single entity of significantly elevated capability, not a guard class but an actual combat asset, and it registered their presence with a speed that suggested either exceptional sensitivity or advance warning. Shizuru moved without hesitation. The engagement was brief, controlled, and precise in the way that Shizuru's close-quarters work was always precise, force directed exactly where it needed to go and nowhere else, the opponent neutralized in 11 seconds without a sound that carried beyond the corridor. She stepped back into position. Rinko was already at the sublevel access. Issei was behind them both, managing boosted gear at the absolute minimum output level that would allow response-ready capability. The crimson glow dialed so far down it was nearly invisible. The sublevel access opened downward. Down they went. The processing center was the most impressive piece of supernatural engineering Issei had encountered since a brief, uncomfortable visit to a location in the dimensional gap that he preferred not to think about. It occupied a natural cave that had been expanded and fitted with the full infrastructure of the architect's design, every surface covered in inscription work of extraordinary refinement. Focusing elements arranged in a precise three-dimensional array that drew the dimensional energy from the anchor points and the regional barrier stress into a coherent flow, and directed it through the resonance generation apparatus at the chamber's center. The apparatus was beautiful, in the way that complex engineered systems are beautiful when they are operating at their designed capacity. A series of linked geometric forms, slowly rotating in relation to each other, the energy moving through them with a smoothness that spoke of years of calibration. The deep pulse that Issei had felt from outside the wall 2 days ago was deafening at this range, not in the ears but in the entire body, and standing at the apparatus's primary interface, watching them arrive with an expression of absolute unsurprise, was the architect. Chapter 18. The Architect. He was not what Issei had expected. Expectations about villains, in Issei's experience, were usually wrong in one of two directions. Either they were smaller and more ordinary than the scale of their actions suggested, or they were larger and stranger in ways that required new categories. The architect was the second type. He was old in a way that did not match his visible age, which appeared to be somewhere in middle years but carried the weight of something considerably longer. He was dressed practically, not dramatically, in working clothes suited to extended time in an enclosed underground space, and he held a data tablet with the ease of a craftsman who has been working on a project for a very long time and is nearly finished. His eyes were the color of deep water, and they moved between the three of them with the assessment of someone accounting for new variables in a calculation, not fear, not anger. Calculation? The Taimanin, he said. Both of you. And the Red Dragon Emperor. He looked at Issei specifically. You were not supposed to still be free. I tend to be, Issei said. The retrieval operation was appropriate for the threat profile I assigned you, the architect said, with the quality of someone doing a genuinely objective retrospective analysis rather than making an excuse. I underestimated the speed with which you would form an effective operational partnership with a Taimanin unit. That was an error in my modeling. You seem very calm for someone whose plan just had 3 people walk into the room, Shizuru said. Because your arrival does not change the operational timeline in the way you expect, the architect said. He looked at the apparatus. The eastern anchor point fell. I compensated. The formation will complete in 11 hours regardless of what happens in this chamber. The western anchor point falls in the next 30 minutes, Issei said. Something shifted in the architect's calculation. That is ahead of my projection, he said. We do not do things on your projection, Rinko said from his left, and the architect's eyes moved to her with the specific attention of someone recategorizing a threat estimate. With both anchor points down, Issei said, can the processing center compensate for both simultaneously? For a time, the architect said. The apparatus has surplus capacity. The compensation will extend the timeline, not end it. Then I am going to need to end it, Issei said. You cannot, the architect said. Not with arrogance. With the same objective quality as everything else, he said. The focusing elements in this array are not physically removable. They are integrated into the cave structure itself. To destroy them you would need to destroy the chamber, and to destroy the chamber you would need a power output that would kill everyone in the installation including yourself. Not everyone, Shizuru said. Just the people who do not leave first. The architect looked at her. For the first time, a quality entered his expression that was something other than calculation. You would sacrifice this installation, he said, to stop what you are building? Yes. There are people in this facility who do not understand what they are part of, the architect said. They came to the syndicate for employment. For purpose. They do not know the operational objective. Then you should have thought about that before you recruited them for it, Shizuru said. A silence. The apparatus rotated. The deep pulse filled the chamber. We are not going to destroy this chamber with people in it, Issei said. Shizuru looked at him. We are not, he said again, steadily. There is another way. There is not, the architect said. Drake says there is, Issei said. And I trust Drake's engineering more than yours, with respect. You can stop a cascade mid-process with a counter-resonance applied at the apparatus's primary interface. You inject a resonance at a precisely calculated inverse frequency to the one the apparatus is generating, and the two cancel each other. The architect's calculations shifted visibly. For the first time, he looked at Issei with something that was not assessment but was close to curiosity. The dragon told you that. He has seen this before. Different configuration, same principle. The counter-resonance would require a power source capable of matching the apparatus's current output, the architect said slowly. The only thing in this room with that capability is me, Issei said. Yes. And applying a counter-resonance of that magnitude at the primary interface, in proximity to the active apparatus, will not be comfortable, Issei said. But it will work. And nobody has to be inside a collapsing chamber. He was already moving toward the interface. The architect did not stop him. The architect stood with his tablet and his objective eyes and watched Issei approach the rotating geometric apparatus with the expression of someone watching a calculation resolve in a way they had not predicted. Rinko was at his right side. Shizuru was at his left. Both of them had put themselves in the positions where they would be most useful if anything tried to prevent what was about to happen. This is going to feel extremely unpleasant, Drake said. Tell me after, Issei said. He put his hand on the primary interface. The inverse resonance, when Drake generated it through the boosted gear and through Issei and into the apparatus, was not a sound or a light or any single sensory event. It was all of them simultaneously, and none of them in any recognizable form. It was the feeling of two things that were built to be opposites encountering each other at full output. Issei held the interface and kept his feet under him through a sustained effort of will that he later could not coherently describe, except that it required every piece of training he had accumulated across 2 years of genuine combat against the most serious opponents his world had offered him, and that without Drake's guidance maintaining the precise inverse frequency against the apparatus's fighting response, it would not have been possible. The apparatus's rotation slowed further. The deep pulse changed frequency. Struggled. Sought a new equilibrium. Issei did not give it one. He felt Rinko's hand on his left arm, steady and real and present in the way that something solid is present when you are in water, the specific quality of an anchor. He felt Shizuru on his right, a different quality, broader, the quality of someone who has positioned themselves to catch what falls rather than to hold what stands. The apparatus stopped. The deep pulse went out. The chamber was completely, absolutely silent for the first time, and then the discharge wave hit. It was not as bad as Drake had estimated it might be. The counter-resonance application had shaped the discharge rather than simply triggering it, channeling the collapsing formation's energy outward along the existing dimensional pathways rather than releasing it as an uncontrolled omnidirectional wave. Still significant. Still the kind of thing that made every supernatural system in the regional triangle go dark for approximately 8 minutes. But the cave was standing. The installation was standing. Nobody was buried in rock. Issei sat on the cave floor with his back against the apparatus housing, which was now cold and still, and breathed. Rinko was beside him, close enough that the physical warmth of her presence was present, which was the kind of thing he did not think she did casually. That was not comfortable, Issei said. No, she agreed. Are you all right? Yes. Are you? I will be in about 20 minutes. Then we will wait 20 minutes. Shizuru was standing over the architect, who had not moved during the entire process, and had not moved now. His expression was not the expression of someone whose plan has failed in the dramatic sense. It was the expression of someone taking inventory of a situation with the same objective quality they brought to everything else. It is over, Shizuru said to him. The formation is gone. The previous anchor structure took years to build. You know that. I know that, the architect said. Then there is a conversation to have about what comes next. Yes, the architect said. He looked at the stopped apparatus. Then at Issei. Then back at Shizuru. Yes. There is. The cave held them all, in the quiet after the great engine had stopped, and somewhere above them the forest was returning to its normal operation, the supernatural systems rebooting, the barrier between worlds returning to its natural thickness, and the specific quality of distance that exists between one universe and another reasserting itself with the patient certainty of things that are older than anyone in the room. The plan that had taken 7 years was finished. What came next was something else entirely. Act 3, What Remains. Chapter 19, After the engine stops. The installation did not surrender quietly. That was the phrase Tatsuri used when he filed the operational report later, and it was accurate in the specific way that understatement is sometimes more accurate than direct description. The collapse of the formation's processing function had not caused the physical structure to collapse with it, but it had caused every supernatural defensive system in the building to discharge simultaneously, which meant that the 8 minutes following the apparatus shutdown were, for everyone in the installation, extremely eventful. Issei learned this afterward, sitting on a crate in the installation's main corridor on the upper level, eating something that Ingrid had produced from her kit and identified as protein, while Rinko applied a field dressing to the secondary impact bruising along his ribs with the same methodical care she brought to everything that required her hands. The discharge hit the upper-level guards simultaneously, Shizuru was saying, from her position at the corridor junction where she was conducting a systematic sweep of the facility. Kurenai had already neutralized the external command structure. Ingrid and Koga came through the eastern perimeter entrance once the defensive array went down. We had the building in approximately 12 minutes. That is fast, Issei said. 12 minutes is not fast, Ingrid said, from somewhere behind him. Her voice had the clipped quality of someone who spent most of her time in conditions where brevity was a survival trait. 12 minutes is adequate. Adequate is sufficient, Koga said, from the same general direction, with the cheerful tone of someone who found adequate entirely satisfactory. How is the inventory looking? Shizuru called to Tatsuru, who had arrived with Ingrid and Koga and was currently working through the facility's documentation stores with the focused energy of someone who understood that intelligence was as important as physical control. Extensive, Tatsuru said. The architect kept meticulous records. This is going to take weeks to fully process. But the top-level material alone. He paused. The previous formation attempts. Locations. Dates. The full operational history of the syndicate going back to its founding. All of it is here. A silence moved through the corridor. The kind of silence that follows a statement about the size of something that has not yet been fully measured. Good, Shizuru said, and the word carried the weight of someone who understood that the information in those records would matter for years after this specific night. Rinko pressed the field dressing into place with a precision that was not entirely devoid of a particular kind of care, and looked at Issei. Ribs, she said. Too bruised. The deep tissue impact on your left side is more serious. You need actual medical attention before anything else strenuous. I can get to strenuous in 24 hours, he said. 48. 36. You are negotiating with your own injury recovery timeline, she said. It is a legitimate opening position. The thing that was almost a smile was more visible tonight than it usually was. The operations tempo of the past 3 days, the particular accumulated pressure of moving from threat to threat without significant rest, had the effect of eroding some of the filtering that people apply to their expressions under lower stakes conditions. Rinko's almost smiles had become, Issei had noticed over the evening, slightly more complete. 48 hours, she said. And that is the final offer. Accepted, he said. The architect was secured in the installation's own holding area, which was well constructed for exactly that purpose, and Shizuru had positioned Ingrid outside it with the clear understanding that nothing was to happen to the occupant in either direction. Issei went to see him after the first sweep of the facility was complete. Not because Shizuru asked him to, and not because he had something specific to resolve. He went because the architect had looked at him throughout the entirety of the processing center confrontation with the quality of someone making an extended assessment, and Issei had the persistent feeling that the assessment was not yet finished. He was right. The architect was sitting on the holding room's single bench with his hands on his knees and his expression in the same objective inventory mode it had been in when the apparatus stopped. He looked up when Issei entered. The counter-resonance technique, he said, without preamble. The dragon's application through a living bearer as the channel. I had not considered that configuration. Drake has seen a lot of things, Issei said. The previous attempts failed at the anchor phase, the architect said. If the formation had reached the processing stage in those attempts, and if a Longinus bearer had been present, the outcome might have been different there as well. Is that supposed to be reassuring or alarming? It is meant to be accurate. A pause. I have been at this for 7 years. I want you to understand the scope of what that means. Not to inspire sympathy. You have no reason to feel sympathy, and I do not require it. But because what I was building was not, in my original conception, what it became. Issei looked at him. What was it in your original conception? A bridge, the architect said. The two universes have been proximate for longer than either civilization can document. Entities cross between them with extraordinary difficulty, at enormous costs through methods that are dangerous to both the traveler and the fabric of the barrier they pass through. A controlled resonance cascade would have created a stable, permanent pathway. Safe transit. No dimensional damage. No catastrophic crossing risk. A tollgate, Issei said. A bridge, the architect repeated. The tollgate framing was your dragons. It is not inaccurate. But a bridge is also a piece of shared infrastructure. Both sides use it. Both sides benefit from the access. And the person who controls a bridge between two supernatural universes, Issei said, has an enormous amount of leverage over everything that needs to cross it. Yes, the architect said. That is true. And I did not design the leverage out of the architecture because... He stopped. Because you wanted it, Issei said. The architect was quiet. You wanted the bridge, Issei said, and you also wanted to be the person the bridge made necessary. Those two things lived together in your plan for 7 years, and you built the bridge around them both. I am not certain, the architect said slowly, that I have been honest with myself about that. No, Issei said. Probably not. But you are now, which is something. The holding room was small and well lit, and had the specific quality of a space that someone has designed to be inescapable without being cruel, and the architect sat in it with his hands on his knees and looked at the floor for a long moment. The bridge idea, Issei said. The actual core of it. Safe transit between two proximate universes without dimensional damage. Yes. That is not a bad idea. The architect looked up. It is a good idea that was built around a bad ambition, Issei said. The bad ambition part is what landed you here. The good idea part. He stood. That is probably a conversation worth having with people who have a stake in both universes. Not now, and not with you holding the controls. But eventually. He left the architect in his room, and the architect was still looking at the floor when the door closed, but there was a different quality to the stillness than there had been before. Chapter 20, First Light. Dawn found the base at a different operational register than any of the past 3 days. The immediate pressure was gone, and in its absence the people who had been moving at operational tempo were doing the things that people do when the immediate pressure releases. Not relaxing, exactly. Processing. The particular human activity of catching up to where you actually are after a period of running too fast to know. Tatsuru was still working through the installation's documents, though he had moved his station to the base and was now operating with the slightly unfocused intensity of someone who has been awake too long and is too interested in what they are reading to stop. Ingrid and Koga had claimed a corner of the operations room and were engaged in a low-voiced professional debrief that showed no signs of requiring external participation. Kurenai had disappeared sometime around 3 in the morning, which Shizuru had noted without comment, and which Issei had decided was characteristic. Mizuki had slept 4 hours and was now at her screens with a cup of tea and an expression that suggested the 4 hours had been sufficient, and she was back to full operating capacity. Shizuru found Issei in his usual spot on the external ledge as the sky went from black to dark blue to the particular pale gray that precedes actual light. She had 2 cups of tea. She handed him one without asking if he wanted it, which was its own kind of statement. The barrier, Issei said. Mizuki has been monitoring it since the discharge, Shizuru said, settling onto the ledge with the economy of motion that he had come to think of as simply how she existed in the world. It is returning to its natural state. The dimensional stress that the formation was drawing on is dispersing. The process will take several days, but there is nothing left of the formation architecture to interrupt it. And the corresponding apparatus in my world? Without the resonance from this side to drive it, it cannot complete. Drake's assessment from last night was that it would either be found and dismantled by the people looking for you, or it would simply decay on its own without active input. Either way, Issei said. Either way, she agreed. He held the tea in both hands, the warmth settling into palms that were still carrying some of the residual sensitivity from the counter-resonance application. Drake had been quiet since the cave, a deep, satisfied quiet rather than an absent one, the way a very large engine sounds when it has been run at full power and is cooling down. The pathway home, Issei said. Mizuki has been working on that too. Shizuru looked at the lightning sky. The barrier returning to its natural state means the specific frequency pathway that brought you here is also dissolving. We have a window of approximately 36 hours while the barrier is still thin enough to allow a directed crossing, with the right technical support. After 36 hours? The barrier will have thickened enough that a crossing would require a power source comparable to what the formation was building toward. Without the formation, that is not something we can generate on this side. So 36 hours, Issei said? Yes. He looked at the forest, at the light moving into it from the east, changing the character of the dark between the trees from absolute to graduated. He had been in this world for 72 hours. The forest was starting to feel familiar. The base was starting to feel like a place he knew. The people in it were starting to feel like a kind of thing he did not have a word for yet. Shizuru, he said. Yes. What you said in the corridor. About building a structure from purpose. About the people who share it becoming load-bearing. Yes. The people in my world, he said carefully. I have a structure there. People who share it. People I am responsible to and for. He paused. And the past 3 days have added something that I do not yet fully know the shape of. Something in this world. Shizuru looked at him with those clear, deep eyes that held their clarity not by limiting what they saw but by not flinching from it. Yes, she said. I know what you mean. Is that? He stopped. Tried again. Is that something you would want to know the full shape of, eventually? When there is time and space to know it properly? A long pause. The light advanced. A bird began somewhere below them, a morning-starting sound, certain and clear. The architect was building a bridge, Shizuru said. With the wrong architecture and the wrong motivation, but the original insight was not wrong. No, Issei said. It was not. 2 universes that have been proximate for longer than either civilization can document, she said. If someone were to address the bridge problem with the right architecture and the right motivation. Eventually, Issei said. Eventually, she agreed. And she said it the same way Rinko had said it on the ledge the previous evening, with the quality of a deferred conversation held carefully rather than abandoned. The tea was warm and the morning was arriving and the forest below them was filling with light. Chapter 21, Mizuki's Work. The crossing mechanism was not simple. Mizuki spent 14 of the 36 hours working on it, which meant she slept 2 hours in the middle and was otherwise at her screens with the productive intensity of someone solving a problem that is genuinely interesting rather than merely urgent. She pulled in Tatsuru for the computational work and consulted Drake through Issei 3 separate times for specific technical parameters, and by hour 15 she had something that she described as theoretically sound and practically demanding. The barrier at its current state of thinning, she said, presenting the model to all of them in the operations room, is permeable to a directed energy application of sufficient magnitude and the correct frequency. We have the correct frequency from Drake's resonance imprint analysis. We have a potential source of sufficient magnitude. She looked at Issei. Me, he said. The boosted gear's output, scaled to a specific level, applied at the barrier's thinnest remaining point, which is the site of the original rift, would create a crossing pathway. Stable for approximately 4 minutes. Which is enough, Issei said. It is enough for one person to cross, Mizuki said. The pathway closure is not controllable once it opens. 4 minutes is the estimate, not a guarantee. And the cost to the barrier? Less than the formation was doing, she said. Significantly less. A single directed crossing at the thinning point is a fraction of the stress the formation was applying. The barrier will still return to natural thickness. It will simply take a few additional hours. Not catastrophic, Rinko said. Not catastrophic, Mizuki confirmed. And the corresponding reception on the other side? Shizuru asked. That, Mizuki said, is the variable I cannot engineer from this side. The pathway will open at the barrier's thinnest point in this world, which corresponds to a specific location in the other world. Whether there is someone on the other side to receive the crossing is outside our control. The resonance imprint I sent through Drake, Issei said. The Great Red responded. That means someone on my side has been tracking the signal. Then they are likely monitoring the corresponding location, Rinko said. That is the working assumption, Issei said. You are comfortable with a working assumption as the foundation of your return journey, Kurinai said, from the corner of the room where she had reappeared at some point during the night, as silently as she had left. I am comfortable with it because the alternative is sitting here until the window closes, Issei said. Which is the only other option. You could wait, Kurinai said. The barrier will thin again eventually. Another crossing window in perhaps 6 months. In 6 months my people do not know I am alive, Issei said. In 6 months whatever is operating the corresponding formation in my world has not been addressed. In 6 months a significant amount of time has passed on the other side of a barrier I can currently cross. He shook his head. No. I go in the window. Kurinai looked at him with that calculating gaze and then looked at Shizuru and then, very briefly, at Rinko. Fair, she said, and the word carried more than its literal content. They spent the remaining hours preparing. The technical preparation was Mizuki and Tatsuru's work, calibrating the directional focus apparatus they were building from the installation's salvaged equipment, the pieces of the architect's engineering that could be repurposed for a single-use crossing rather than a sustained cascade. The operational preparation was Shizuru's, organizing the handover of the installation and its intelligence to the appropriate Taimanin Council contacts, handling the architect's formal detention documentation with the careful attention of someone who understands that the paperwork of important events matters for how those events are understood later. Rinko prepared in her own way. She spent an hour on the external ledge with her maintenance kit, going through her equipment with the systematic care that warriors who respect their tools give them after a significant operation. She did this alone, which was her characteristic mode for things that required internal attention. Issei found her there when he came out to think. 14 hours, he said, sitting down in his usual position. 13 hours and 40 minutes, she corrected, without looking up from the blade she was examining. Is that better or worse? She considered the question with genuine attention, which was her characteristic approach to questions that deserved it. Neither, she said. It is the amount of time there is. He watched her work. There was something in the way Rinko Akiyama handled her equipment that was worth watching, not as performance but as process, the same quality as watching someone who is genuinely expert at anything, the economy and precision of deep familiarity. The people waiting for you on the other side, she said, after a while? Yes. Important to you? Yes. Deeply. Good, she said, and the word had a quality that Issei had to listen to carefully to understand correctly. It was not the performance of not caring. It was the genuine satisfaction of someone who has found a person worthwhile, and is glad that person has people who are worthwhile in return. Rinko. Yes. What we talked about last night, he said. On the ledge. About significant. About after. She set the blade down and looked at him with the full, direct attention she kept carefully distributed and never gave carelessly. I said what I meant, she said. I know. I am saying it back. He held her gaze steadily. Everything in the past 4 days. Working with you. The way you move through difficult terrain. The way you think. The way you told me the head removal was a precaution rather than a preference, and meant it as the closest thing to a welcome you had available at the time. The almost smile again, more present tonight. It was. And the 45 seconds, he said more quietly. She was quiet for a moment. Yes. The 45 seconds. The 45 seconds was the operational detail, but it was also something else, the specific moment when what someone does with their body in a fight tells you more about what they value than anything they could say, and what Issei had done with those 45 seconds was not a tactical choice but a fundamental expression of a priority set. Rinko had catalogued it in the first 30 seconds and had held it since. When there is a way, Issei said. And there will be a way, because the bridge idea is a good one and eventually someone will build it correctly. When there is a way to cross between these two worlds without catastrophic dimensional cost, I would like to have a longer conversation than the one we have been having between operations. A conversation, she said, with a precision that was not mockery but was accuracy about the understatement in the word. Several, he said. As many as it takes to know the full shape of the thing. Rinko picked up the blade again, resumed her examination, and said nothing for a moment. When she spoke, it was to the blade rather than to him, which was her way of saying something that she was choosing very carefully. When there is a way, she said. Yes. Yes, he said. And the evening settled around them, and below the ledge the forest was doing what forests do at evening, becoming something other than its daytime self, and neither of them needed to say anything else. Chapter 22, What the Records Showed. Tatsuru found the section he had been half expecting and half dreading at hour 19 of the document review. He called Mizuki over first, then Shizuru, and the three of them read the relevant sections in the installation's archive while Issei sat nearby, not invited into the reading but present in the way that someone is present when they understand that what is being processed concerns them without being about them. When Shizuru looked up from the tablet, her expression carried the specific quality of someone integrating important information rather than reacting to surprising information. The difference being that surprise implies the thing was not already suspected. The architect's intelligence network, she said, extended into your world more thoroughly than we estimated. How thoroughly? Issei asked. The records include partial documentation on the major supernatural factions in your world. Devils, fallen angels, the broad organizational structure. She paused. And specific intelligence on Kuoh. The territory. The household operating there. Issei was very still. How specific? Individual identification, Mizuki said, from behind the tablet. Names. Power assessments. Relationship structures. She looked up. Nothing operational. No attack planning. The intelligence appears to be entirely strategic, understanding the faction landscape rather than targeting anyone specifically. But it is detailed. Which means, Issei said carefully, that whoever the architect had operating on the other side of the barrier was not a blind instrument. They were an informed one. Yes, Shizuru said. And that person is still in my world. The records give no identification of who it is, Tatsuru said. The architect apparently kept operational and intelligence functions completely separated. The person on the other side is referred to only as the correspondent. Then I am going back to a world where someone with detailed intelligence on my household and my faction structure has been operating as the architect's eyes and without that being known, Issei said. Yes, Shizuru said. He sat with that for a moment. Does the record give any indication of the correspondent's access level? He asked. Not who they are but what kind of position they would need to be in to gather this quality of intelligence. Mizuki scanned. The intelligence quality on the faction structure suggests either a member of one of the factions or someone with direct, repeated access to faction members over a significant period of time. Not a distant observer, Rinko said. She had come in from the corridor and was standing at the edge of the group with that quality of having processed the immediate situation faster than she had been able to enter it. Not a distant observer, Mizuki confirmed. Issei thought about Kuoh. About the people he trusted there, the people who moved through the Occult Research Club's territory, the people who had access to the things that access would be required to know the details in those records. The list was long enough to be uncomfortable and short enough to be disturbing. I cannot resolve this from here, he said. I need to go back and I need to go back with full awareness of the problem. Can you copy the relevant sections of the architect's records? Everything on my world. Everything on the correspondent reference. Already being done, Tatsuru said. I am sending it through a secure channel, Mizuki said. The records will be in a format you can access on your side through Drake's resonance network, assuming the pathway holds for data as well as a physical crossing. Drake says it will hold, Issei said, having checked internally during the conversation. Then you go back informed, Shizuru said. Which is better than the alternative. It is also a problem to solve, he said. In my world. With my people. Yes, Shizuru said. But you have those. He did. He looked at the tablet screen and the careful, patient intelligence work of 7 years that had been built around his world without his world knowing it, and he thought about the conversation he was going to have with Rias, and what the structure of that conversation would look like. And he felt the familiar weight of a thing that needs to be solved settling across his shoulders with the particular quality of a problem that belongs to him. Thank you, he said, to the room in general. We are not done yet, Tatsuru said. I know, Issei said. I mean it for the work so far. Chapter 23, The Wait of 3 Days. There were 6 hours remaining in the crossing window when Issei went to find Shizuru. She was in the installation, doing the last of the handover documentation with the methodical thoroughness that Issei had come to understand as one of her fundamental characteristics, the refusal to do anything incompletely regardless of the circumstances. He waited until she had finished the section she was working on, which was approximately 7 minutes, and she knew he was there from the first second, but she was finishing the section because that was what needed to be done. When she looked up, her expression was in the mode he was most familiar with now, clear and direct, holding what it held without either performing it or concealing it. The crossing is set for 90 minutes from now, she said. I know. Mizuki's apparatus is calibrated and the barrier reading is optimal for the next 2 hours. I know that too. He sat down on the installation storage bench. I wanted to talk to you before we were in the operational environment of the crossing preparation. She set down her tablet and gave him her full attention, the particular quality of Shizuru Kosaka's full attention that was never anything other than precisely what it was. I have been thinking about what you said this morning, he said. About the bridge. About eventually. Yes. I want you to understand something clearly, not as something implied or assumed but as something said directly. I am listening. The 3 days in this world, he said. Everything that happened in them. The forest. The base. The conversations in corridors and on ledges and in installation chambers at 3 in the morning. You and Rinko and Mizuki. What was built? He looked at her steadily. I carry that. Across whatever distance and barrier there is between these 2 worlds, I carry it. It does not diminish in the absence. It does not become theoretical. Shizuru was quiet for a long moment. Issei, she said, and it was the first time she had used his name without a title attached to it or a context that required the precision of the full form. And the difference was significant in the way that small changes in form carry large changes in meaning. Yes. What was built in 3 days, she said, was built quickly because the circumstances required it to be. But the construction is real. The materials were genuine. I do not. She paused, choosing the words with the same precision she brought to everything. I do not speak easily about things in this category. It is a limitation I have. It is not a limitation, he said. Speaking precisely about important things is not a limitation. Speaking precisely and meaning it completely is the opposite. She held his gaze for a moment that had the quality of something balanced, something at the point of staying or becoming something else. Then she said very quietly, I will hold the bridge idea. I will build it, he said. Eventually. Then I will wait for it, she said. And this was Shizuru's version of what Rinko had said on the ledge, the deferred conversation held with full intention, and it carried everything it needed to carry in the 6 words she had chosen, and Issei understood it completely. I need to finish this documentation, she said. I know, he said and stood. Shizuru. Yes. Thank you. For the blades at my throat as the opening position. The thing that happened to her face then was not the contained expression he was accustomed to. It was not quite a smile and not quite something else, but it was genuine in the way that things are genuine when they have not been prepared for, and it was brief and it was real, and he carried it with him when he left. Chapter 24, Mizuki's Letter. Mizuki gave him a physical document 2 hours before the crossing. This was unexpected, and the unexpectedness of it made it more significant rather than less, because Mizuki Shiranui communicated in digital formats and data structures, and the choice to produce something physical was the choice of someone who had decided that the medium was part of the message. What is this? Issei asked. A technical summary, Mizuki said, with the characteristic precision that could be deployed as deflection when she preferred it to be. The formation mechanics, the counter-resonance technique parameters, the crossing pathway specifications. Everything Drake and I worked out together over the past 20 hours. In case it is needed again. In case anyone in your world needs to understand what happened here. Or in case the corresponding formation apparatus needs to be dismantled using similar methods. She paused. There is also a second section. What is in the second section? It is, she said, and her characteristic analytical composure acquired a very slight quality of something that was not quite awkwardness and not quite vulnerability, but was somewhere adjacent to both, a record of the past 4 days from an intelligence and operational perspective. The full picture as I understand it. What occurred, why it matters, and… Another pause. What my assessment is of the parties involved. Issei looked at the document in his hands. Your assessment of the parties involved, he said. It is important that accurate records are kept, Mizuki said, with the tone of someone who is aware their explanation is slightly unconvincing and has decided to stand by it anyway. Mizuki. Yes. Thank you. It is a technical document, she said. The second section is not a technical document. She met his eyes. No, she said. It is not. He held the document carefully. Mizuki Shiranui had spent 4 days in a base under operational pressure producing intelligence analysis and communications architecture and crossing pathway engineering, and in the spaces between all of that she had been building something else, quietly and without announcing it, the way she built everything. A record of something she had observed closely and found worth recording precisely because she wanted it to exist somewhere outside the moment it had happened in. The second section, he said carefully. Can I ask what your assessment of the parties involved concluded? Mizuki considered the question with the full weight of her intelligence, which she brought to everything including this. That the parties involved, she said, are the kind of people who make a different world. She paused, and the pause was deliberate, or a different kind of world possible. The words were measured and chosen, and they said exactly what she intended them to say. I will read all of it, he said. Both sections. Good, she said, and returned to her screens with the composure of someone who has said the important thing and does not require the conversation to be extended beyond it. Issei put the document inside his jacket, against his chest, where things that need to be kept safe are kept. Chapter 25, Ingrid, Koga, Kurinai. There were farewells to be said with people who were not the 3 women who had been at the center of everything. Ingrid shook his hand with a grip that communicated professional respect and nothing more and nothing less. She had watched the operation from the position of an experienced professional evaluating an unfamiliar element, and the evaluation had been favorable enough that she had integrated him into the unit's tactical picture without resistance, and that was, in Ingrid's operational language, the highest compliment available. If you come back, she said, and you need people, you know where to look. I know where to look, he said. Koga's farewell was louder and warmer and involved a clap on the shoulder that made Issei's bruised ribs make a strong objection, and Koga apologized with genuine contrition and then did it again slightly more gently, because that was apparently how Koga expressed the gradation between acquaintance and ally. Tatsuru gave him a data chip. Everything I could pull from the architect's records in the time available, he said. Compressed and formatted for the resonance data channel Drake confirmed can carry it. It is the full archive, not just the summary. That is significant, Issei said. It is your world, Tatsuru said, with a simplicity that made the statement larger than it appeared. You should have the information about what was happening in it. Kurinai found him in the corridor on the way to the crossing site. She fell into step beside him with the particular quality of someone who has decided to say something and has not yet decided exactly how to say it, and they walked 20 meters in the working silence before she resolved the question. The architect's bridge idea, she said. Yes. I have been thinking about it since you mentioned it to him. And? The Taimanin Council will not support it, she said, with the directness of someone who knows an institution thoroughly enough to know its limits. The idea of a permanent crossing pathway between 2 supernatural universes will read as an unacceptable security risk. There will be factions in your world with the same response. Yes, Issei agreed. Which means if it is ever going to be built correctly, it will be built by people who operate outside those institutional responses. People like Taimanin who act independently, Issei said. And people like the Occult Research Club, which is technically a student club and not a recognized faction instrument. Kurinai's calculating gaze acquired a quality that might, in someone with a more expressive face, have been amusement. Yes. People like that. Are you volunteering? Issei asked. I am observing, she said, that when the project begins in earnest, the right people will need to know each other. And I have now met one of the right people. And the other right people? Issei said. Are the ones you already know, she said. And the ones in your world who are currently very upset about your absence, and will be considerably interested in what you bring back with you. That is a generous framing of what is probably going to be a very loud homecoming, Issei said. You went through a dimensional rift into a different universe and disrupted a 7-year cross-dimensional conspiracy, Kurinai said. The loudness of the homecoming is proportional to the scale of the concern. Fair point, he said. They arrived at the site and she stopped while he continued, and the last thing she said was, the Red Dragon Emperor. In this world you were an unexpected variable. In your world, try not to be one. I make no promises, Issei said, and heard her quiet sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she apparently produced, behind him as he walked toward the crossing preparation. Chapter 26, The Crossing Site. The site of the original rift was exactly as it had been when Issei had arrived through it, except now it was daytime and there were people here who understood what they were doing and a piece of equipment constructed from salvaged architect materials that Mizuki and Tatsuru had spent 20 hours calibrating. The equipment looked nothing like the violet rift that had grabbed him from the Kuoh rooftop. It looked like a directional array, modest in scale, with the same inscription work as all of the Taimanin tools but denser and more precisely organized. A focusing mechanism for the energy that Issei himself would provide. All of them were there. Ingrid, Koga, and Tatsuru at the array controls. Kurinai at the perimeter, because that was her characteristic position, outside the immediate circle but covering it. Mizuki beside the array, her tablet running the real-time barrier monitoring that would tell them when the window was optimal. And Shizuru and Rinko close. Rinko stood exactly as she had stood when she had first held a blade to his throat and then when she had held his arm in the processing center cave, with the same quality of absolute presence that was her native state, and she looked at him with those dark, measuring eyes that had measured him against things he did not know the standard for and had, apparently, found him sufficient. Your ribs, she said, are fine, he said. They are not fine. They are manageable. You have been paying attention. I always pay attention, she said. He held her gaze for a moment that contained everything the past 4 days had built between them, the specific weight of shared danger, and the specific quality of trust that only forms in the spaces between one kind of threat and the next, when the people around you show you what they are made of and you show them what you are made of and the showing is mutual and clear. After, he said. After, she said, and the word this time was not a deferral but a certainty. Not if but when. Shizuru's hand on his arm was brief and firm and communicated everything that Shizuru communicated, which was everything that needed to be communicated and nothing that did not. Come back, she said. When the bridge is built. When, he said. Not if. When, she agreed. Mizuki looked up from her monitoring. The barrier reading is optimal. We have approximately 15 minutes in the ideal window. Then we go, Shizuru said, and stepped back from the array with Rinko, both of them falling into the positions from which they would cover whatever needed covering in the event that the crossing attracted attention in the last moments. Tatsuru gave Issei a small nod that carried the specific quality of a person who has done something technically demanding and is quietly proud of it. Mizuki said, the array will focus your output. The boosted gear needs to sustain the application for approximately 90 seconds. Drade confirmed the frequency parameters this morning. He has them, Issei said. Good. She looked at him with those warm, analytically precise eyes that had been reading him since the moment he walked into the base. Issei. Yes. The second section of the document. The assessment of the parties involved. Yes. It is accurate, she said. Everything in it is accurate. I want you to know that before you read it. He held her gaze for a moment. I know it is, he said. You do not write inaccurate things. She looked back at her screen, because the barrier monitoring required it, and because that was Mizuki's way, the return to the work as the form of everything that needed to be expressed through the work. Issei stepped into the array's focus point. He looked back once. Rinko was still, present in her complete way, her eyes on him. Shizuru stood at the edge of the clearing with the morning light of this world behind her, silver-haired and clear-eyed and carrying 4 days of shared purpose in the way that she carried everything, without drama and without diminishment. The forest of this world was doing what forests do in the morning, filling with the particular quality of light that belongs only to early hours, the quality that makes everything look newly made. Ready, Drake said, warm and present and ancient. Ready, Issei said, and let the boosted gear go. The crimson light hit the array and the array caught it and focused it into the thinning barrier point with the precision of Mizuki's engineering and Drake's calibration combined, and the barrier, which was a door rather than a wall when addressed in the correct language, recognized the frequency and opened. It was not the violet rift that had grabbed him without his consent. It was a door. Stepped through willingly, carrying Mizuki's document against his chest and Tatsuru's data chip in his pocket, and 4 days of built understanding in everything else, Issei Hyoudou crossed between worlds for the second time in 4 days. The crossing was not easy. It was demanding in exactly the way Mizuki had said it would be demanding, 90 seconds of sustained output at a level that left his arms trembling and Drake cycling down rapidly to recovery mode, and the sensation of dimensional transition at full awareness was nothing like the sudden grab of the original rift. It was like swimming through something that was trying to stay a wall. And then it was not. And then there was different air, cold and pine-scented but a different pine, the specific atmospheric composition of his own world that he had not fully noticed until he was breathing something that was almost but not quite its equivalent. A different quality of supernatural ambient, the background radiation of a world that ran on devil and angel and sacred gear energy rather than Taimanin chi and syndicate engineering. A different sky. Recognizable. His own. And standing in the clearing where the corresponding thinning point existed in his world, looking at him with the particular expression of someone who has been monitoring a dimensional anomaly for 4 straight days without sleep and has just had their vigil rewarded, was Akino Himejima. Chapter 27, The Return. Akino stared at him for approximately 2 seconds. Then she said, "You look terrible." "Hello to you too," Issei said. His legs were in the process of informing him that the sustained output had a cost, and the cost was currently being presented for collection. "Your ribs," she said, moving toward him with her particular combination of grace and sharpness that made everything she did look like 2 things happening simultaneously. Her hands were already assessing. At minimum 2 bruised. There is deep tissue impact on the left side. "What happened to you?" "A great deal," he said. "Where is Rias?" "Here," said a voice from the tree line. Rias Gremory stepped out of the shadow of the trees with her crimson hair and her crimson eyes and the particular quality of authority combined with something that was very far from authority, the quality of someone who has been frightened for 4 days and is managing the residue of it in real time. She crossed the distance between them in the time it took Issei to take 2 steps toward her, and the embrace was not delicate. "Issei," she said, into his shoulder, and that was all she said for a moment, just his name, which was sufficient. "I am all right," he said. "You have bruised ribs. I have managed them for 24 hours, I can manage them for the debrief." She pulled back enough to look at him, and the crimson of her eyes was doing the thing it did when she was managing more than one emotion and keeping them organized through force of will. 4 days. The club has been monitoring the anomaly since the first night. We triangulated your signal when Drake's resonance imprint came through. We have been here, rotating shifts, since day 2. "The corresponding formation apparatus," he said. "In this world. Kiba and Zenobia located it on day 3, Rias said. "We have been maintaining a perimeter around it without disrupting it because we did not know what disrupting it would do to the crossing pathway." "You made the right call," Issei said. "I will explain why. All of it. The whole picture." He reached into his jacket and produced the document, and reached into his pocket for the data chip. "And I have records." Rias looked at the document and the chip with the expression of someone registering the size of what has arrived. "You came back with intelligence." "I came back with a great deal," he said. "Including a problem that needs to be solved on this side and information about something that has been operating in this world without our knowledge." Akino had finished her assessment, and was standing slightly behind Rias with the expression she wore when she was being professionally attentive rather than expressively herself. "The debrief," she said. "At the clubhouse. Kaneko and Zenobia are there. Kiba should be back from the formation perimeter within the hour." "Yes," Rias said. She looked at Issei one more time with those crimson eyes and then, because she was Rias Gremory, and she was precise about what she said when it mattered, she said, "I am glad you are back." "I am glad to be back," Issei said. Both things were true. He was glad to be back. He was also, in the specific, careful way that he had decided to hold the past 4 days, carrying something from a world that was not his own, that was neither nostalgia nor separation, but was the particular quality of something real that was waiting for the right time to continue. He looked at the sky of his world, which was his sky, which had the specific blue that had been in the background of his whole life. Then he walked out of the clearing, between Rias and Aquino, toward the clubhouse and the debrief and the long, detailed, complicated conversation that the next several hours were going to require, carrying the document from Mizuki and the data chip from Tatsuru and the weight of 4 days that had built something he did not yet have a name for in a world he did not yet know how to reach again. He would find a name for it, and he would find the way back. Chapter 28, The Correspondent. The debrief took 6 hours. Issei had given long debriefs before. After the raiding games, after the encounter with Valley, after the Kyoto expedition, after every significant event in the compressed, escalating history of his life since Rias had reincarnated him. He knew the rhythm of them, the careful initial summary followed by the questions that opened the summary into the full detailed picture, followed by the analysis of implications, followed by the operational questions about what came next. This debrief was longer than any of the previous ones, not because the events were more complex in absolute terms, though they were complex, but because the implications extended in directions that the club had not previously been required to think about. A second supernatural universe, proximate to their own, with its own factions and wars and history. A 7-year intelligence operation that had developed detailed knowledge of their world's supernatural landscape without their awareness. A person operating inside their world with the capability to gather that intelligence. That last point was where the debrief shifted from historical to operational. The correspondent, Rias said. She was at the head of the club room table with the full attention she brought to problems that required it. The architect's records give no identification but indicate someone with direct, sustained access to faction members. The intelligence quality, Kiba said, from the left side of the table, scanning the document Issei had translated with Drake's help during the crossing recovery, suggests someone who has not just observed faction members but interacted with them extensively. The assessments of individual capabilities are too accurate for distant observation, Rias, Zenobia said. She had the particular directness that was one of her fundamental qualities, the trained willingness to say the thing that needs to be said without excessive navigation. The intelligence on Kuoh's household. It includes all of us. Yes, Rias said. Which means the correspondent has spent significant time around us. Yes. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when an unwelcome truth has been stated clearly. I want to be careful, Issei said, about what we conclude from this. The architect's records show intelligence collection but not malicious operational use of that intelligence against our household. The correspondent was building an information picture, not planning attacks. The purpose appears to have been to understand the landscape so the architect could plan around the major players. That does not make the correspondent trustworthy, Kaneko said. She had been quiet for most of the debrief, sitting with her knees drawn up in her characteristic posture, and processing everything with the thorough attention she gave to things she considered important. No, Issei agreed. It does not. It means the immediate risk is different from what it would be if the purpose had been offensive. But the person exists, they have access, and we do not know who they are. We investigate, Rias said. Carefully. Without alerting whoever it is until we have something more than a general profile. The architect's operation is finished, Issei said. The formation is gone. The cascade cannot complete. Whoever the correspondent is, their purpose in this world is no longer active in the original sense. The question is what they do now that the operation they were supporting has failed. They may not know it has failed yet, Aquino said. They will know, Issei said. The barrier thickening will be detectable to anyone sensitive enough to have been managing the corresponding formation apparatus here. They will know something changed, which means they are currently recalibrating their position, Kiba said. And we are in a window where they are uncertain and we are not. Use the window, Rias said. She looked around the table. I want analysis of everyone who has had extended contact with our household over the past 2 years. Full review. No assumptions. We treat this the way we would treat any intelligence problem. Nods around the table. And Issei, Rias said. Yes. The people on the other side of the barrier. The Taimanin. You trust them. It was not quite a question and not quite a statement. It was Rias confirming something she had already assessed from 4 days of monitoring and 6 hours of debrief, and the specific quality of the way Issei talked about the past 4 days when he talked about the people in them. Yes, he said. Completely. She nodded once. Then their intelligence is our intelligence. Integrated. Already planning to, he said. The meeting broke after the operational assignments were distributed. Kaneko left with the stillness of someone who has already begun processing their assignment. Zenobia left with the purposeful energy that she brought to anything that involved a concrete task. Kiba and Akino left together, discussing something in low voices that had the quality of technical analysis rather than personal conversation. Ria stayed. She stayed the way she stayed when she had something to say that needed the room to be just the two of them. Issei sat across from her at the now empty table and waited. The document, she said. Mizuki's second section. He looked at her. You read it. You handed it to me as part of the debrief material, she said. I read everything. Yes, he said. The 3 of them, she said. Shizuru. Rinko. Mizuki. She did not name them, but they were named. Yes, he said again. Rias was quiet for a moment. She had the particular quality of composure she deployed when something required both honesty and care simultaneously, the kind of composure that is not absence of feeling but is its organized presence. You are going to go back, she said. When there is a way, he said. Yes. And what was built there, she said carefully, in 4 days of the kind of circumstances that build things fast, is real, he said. Yes. I am not going to tell you otherwise. Rias looked at her hands on the table. Then at him. Then at something in the middle distance that was probably a version of her own internal landscape. The people I have in my peerage, she said. The people in this club. The relationships we have built, all of us, over 2 years of exactly the kind of circumstances that build things fast. She paused. I understand what 4 days in a crisis with people of exceptional capability and genuine character can build. I understand it from my own experience. Rias, he said. I am not finished, she said, not unkindly. I understand it. And I also understand, she continued, that you are Issei Hyoudou, who takes everything seriously and drops nothing. Who has never treated the people who matter to him as less than what they are. She looked at him with her crimson eyes. So I am not going to tell you what to do with what was built there. I am going to tell you that I trust you. And that when there is a way back, I will help you find it. He looked at her for a long moment. Rias, he said. Yes. Thank you. You are my knight, she said, with the particular warmth that lived underneath her authority like a second foundation. The things that matter to you matter to me. They sat for a while longer in the quiet of the club room, with the afternoon light of Kuoh coming through the window in the familiar warm gold that belonged to this specific latitude, and this specific season and this specific world. And Issei held the past 4 days in one hand and everything waiting in the present in the other and felt, for the first time since stepping onto that school rooftop, genuinely located. Here. And also, in a way that was patient and real and not in conflict with here, still connected to there. Chapter 29, The Corresponding Formation. The formation apparatus in Issei's world was dismantled the following morning. Kiba and Zenobia had maintained the perimeter around it for 4 days, and Issei reviewed the structure in the light of the morning with the full knowledge of what it was and what it had been building toward, and then he and Drake did together, in a much smaller and more controlled version, what they had done in the processing center cave. The discharge was minimal. Without the connection to the formation on the other side, the apparatus had been running in a degraded state, and the energy it had accumulated was only a fraction of what the full cascade would have required. The counter-resonance dissolved it in under 30 seconds, and the small ripple that moved outward through the clearing was no more alarming than a cold wind. Kiba watched with his characteristic attentive silence. That is what the other side looked like, he said. But larger, much larger, Issei said. And with someone who understood what they were doing at the controls. The architect. The architect, Issei confirmed. Kiba looked at the now cleared formation site with the quiet assessment of someone filing information into a long-term analytical structure. You said he was not a villain in the theatrical sense. He was a person with a genuine idea who built an architecture of control around it because he could not separate the idea from the control, Issei said. Which is a human failure rather than a monstrous one. Is there a meaningful distinction? I think so, Issei said. A monstrous failure does not course correct when it encounters its own reflection. A human one sometimes does. Kiba was quiet for a moment. And the Taimanin's handling of him? Appropriate, Issei said. He is in custody. The records are being processed. He will answer for what he built, and what it cost. He paused. But Shizuru is not in the business of cruelty for its own sake. Neither is Rinko. Kiba nodded. The nod said he had understood more than the literal content, which was Kiba's characteristic mode of reception. Come on, Issei said. We have an investigation to run. The correspondent investigation moved carefully over the following days. It was the kind of investigation that could not be rushed without risking the thing it was investigating, and Rias understood this and managed the pace with the same precision she brought to her rating game strategy. Identifying the specific intelligence in the architect's records, cross-referencing it against the people who could plausibly have gathered it, narrowing the field. Issei was both inside and outside the investigation, which was an uncomfortable position but a structurally necessary one. Inside because he had the most complete picture of what the intelligence contained and what its collection implied. Outside because any significant emotional response to findings would telegraph the investigation's progress to whoever was being investigated. He managed the balance by doing what he had learned to do in difficult situations, holding the operational and the personal in separate but honest compartments, moving between them with the deliberateness of someone who understands that both are real and neither should be collapsed into the other. He also, in the quiet hours of the investigation's early days, read Mizuki's second section. It was, as she had promised, accurate. Every observation was precise. Every conclusion was supported by the evidence she cited. The document read like a rigorous analytical report in its structure and its language, and underneath that structure was something that a rigorous analytical report had no framework for and did not try to create one for, which was that Mizuki Shiranui had been paying attention to more than the operational data and had found, in what she paid attention to, something she considered worth recording. He read it twice. The second time, more slowly. Then he put it in the place where he kept things that needed to be held carefully until there was time to understand them fully. Chapter 30, What Remains. 10 days after the return, on a Tuesday afternoon with ordinary light coming through the windows of the Occult Research Club room, Issei Hyoudou sat at the table where he had sat for 2 years of extraordinary events, and wrote a letter. Not in any language that was directly transmissible across dimensional barriers through normal channels. He wrote it in a form that Drake had described as a resonance notation, a sequence of energy patterns that carried semantic content in a way that any entity sensitive enough to decode it could read. It was not fast, and it was not certain, and it was the only channel currently available. He wrote 3 of them. The first was to Shizuru. He told her about the formation dismantlement, and the correspondent investigation, and the specific way that Rias's response to Mizuki's document had made him understand something about the people in his life that he had known in a general sense, but had not understood in this specific application. He told her that the bridge idea was already being thought about by people in his world who would be valuable to the project when the time came. He told her that he carried the corridor conversation, and the cup of tea shared in early morning light, and the specific quality of her presence in the way that he carried things that were not temporary. The second was to Rinko. He told her about the 45 seconds, from his perspective rather than from the tactical description she had given him. What the decision had felt like from the inside. Why it had not been a calculation. He told her about Kiba, who moved through difficult terrain the way she did, and about Akino, who noticed injuries before the person who had them. He told her about the ledge conversation replaying in his head with the quality that specific conversations have when they are load-bearing. He told her that after was not a direction on a map that he would lose. It was a place he knew the address of. The third was to Mizuki. He told her that he had read the second section. He told her it was the most precise description of a set of things he had not had words for that he had ever encountered, and that the precision was the point, that the precision was what made it fully true rather than approximately true. He told her that someone who could write a document like that about things that most people never got close enough to see was the kind of person who made different kinds of possibilities possible. He told her he understood what she had meant when she said that. He sent all three through Drag's resonance channels and did not know when or whether they would arrive, and held that uncertainty with the same steadiness he held everything else that was outside his immediate control. The club room was warm and familiar and had the specific quality of a place that holds its history in its walls, every significant conversation and every difficult decision and every moment of genuine connection that had happened within them giving the air a particular weight that was not oppressive but was full. Kaneko came in and put a cup of something warm on the table next to him without asking if he wanted it, which was Kaneko's version of the same gesture Shizuru had made with the tea on the dawn ledge, and he accepted it with the same understanding that this was care expressed in the language of someone who does not need the gesture to be announced. Asia is coming, Kaneko said. Good, Issei said. She has been worried. I know. You are going to tell her it was fine. I am going to tell her the truth, which is that it was extremely not fine and also that I handled it. Kaneko looked at him with those amber eyes that missed nothing and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, You came back different. Different how? Not worse, she said. More. Like something was added. He looked at her, this small, impossibly perceptive person who had been part of his life for 2 years through battles and dinners and study sessions and all the ordinary extraordinary days that the supernatural world of Kuoh Academy generated. Something was, he said. She nodded, satisfied with this answer, and went to make something in the kitchen that smelled like it was going to be considerably better than anything Issei had eaten in the past 10 days. He picked up his pen and held it for a moment, not writing, just holding it, thinking about triangular formations and corridor conversations and the specific weight of 45 seconds and the way that different worlds can be proximate to each other for longer than either civilization can document, can be close enough that the barriers between them thin in certain places, and the people on either side of those thin places, if they are paying attention, can feel the warmth of the other side. He thought about bridges. He thought about after. He thought about a forest in morning light with silver-haired steadiness and dark precise eyes and warm analytical attention and the specific quality of a world that had been completely foreign 4 days ago and had become, in 4 days of the kind of events that compress time into something denser than ordinary experience. Something he carried as part of himself. He set the pen down. Outside the window, Kuoh was doing its ordinary Tuesday business, the surface of a world where extraordinary things happened underneath ordinary light, and Issei Hyoudou sat in the warmth of it, and held the extraordinary things and the ordinary light together without needing to choose between them. The investigation would continue. The bridge would be built. The window would open again. He could wait. He was good at carrying things. He had been practicing for 2 years and he was, by any honest accounting, very good at it now. The warm cup on the table steamed. The light came through the window at the angle it always came through at this hour on a Tuesday. Somewhere in the school below, the ordinary afternoon proceeded with complete indifference to the dimensional mechanics and the forest dark operations and the cave depth counter resonances that had occupied the person sitting in this room 4 days ago. Issei picked up the cup and drank from it. It was good tea. Kaneko made good tea. Some things, at least, were simple. End of Act 3.